She was already smiling when she walked into that hotel. She had the ultrasound photograph folded inside her coat pocket. 12 weeks, a son. And she kept touching it the way people touch things they can't believe are real. Elena Voss had driven 40 minutes across the city, rehearsing the exact moment she would hand it to her husband. She had imagined his face. She had imagined everything. Then the door to room 1408 opened. A woman stepped out wearing Cassian's shirt, white, monogrammed, unmistakable, and walked toward the elevator without a single glance backward. No guilt, no hesitation. The relaxed, unhurried walk of someone who had every reason to be exactly where she was. Elena's hand went to her coat pocket. The photograph was still there. She stood in that hallway for a long time after the elevator doors closed. Long enough for everything she had planned to say to become impossible. If this story already has you gripping something, your chair, your phone, your heart, then you know exactly why you need to stay until the very end. Subscribe to this channel right now, because every single week we bring you stories that will shake you, move you, and remind you what it means to be human. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning of the worst morning of Elena Moretti's life. Elena had not slept well in months, but that morning she woke up before the alarm. That alone was unusual. For most of the past 4 years, mornings in the Moretti household had a particular texture, the particular texture of absence. Cassian would already be gone before 6, sometimes before 5. His side of the bed cold and smooth as if he had never been there at all. Elena had stopped setting 2 coffee cups out sometime during the 2nd year of their marriage. She couldn't remember exactly when. It had just happened, the way a lot of things in their life together had just happened, quietly and without announcement. But that Thursday morning, she woke up at 5:15 with her hand pressed flat against her stomach, and a feeling she couldn't name pressing outward from somewhere inside her chest. Not anxiety, not dread. Something the opposite of those things. Something that felt, if she was honest with herself, like the particular recklessness of hope. She had the appointment the previous Tuesday. Dr. Farrow had turned the monitor screen toward her and said, with the calm professional warmth of someone who delivered good news several times a day, that the fetus was developing beautifully. 12 weeks. Strong heartbeat. And then, almost as an afterthought, a question. Did Elena want to know the sex? She had not planned to find out. She had not planned most of this pregnancy, which had arrived 7 months after she had quietly stopped believing it ever would. But something made her say yes. And Dr. Farrow had pointed to the screen, and Elena had looked, and the word the doctor used, boy, had landed somewhere so deep inside her that she had not been able to speak for almost a full minute. She had cried in the parking lot, ugly crying, the kind that makes your face do things it has no business doing, the kind you only do when no one is watching. Then she had pulled herself together, driven home, and spent 2 days deciding exactly how she would tell Cassian. He was in Manhattan for business. He had meetings. Cassian always had meetings. But he was staying at the Harrington Grand, the same hotel where they had spent their first anniversary, back when Elena still believed that 4 walls and good champagne could fix whatever it was that sat between them at dinner every night. He would be back Friday evening. She could wait. She did not wait. She printed the ultrasound photograph at a drugstore near their house. She wrote nothing on it. She thought she wouldn't need to. She put it in her coat pocket and drove to the city. The drive was 40 minutes. She spent most of it rehearsing. Not words exactly, more like scenes. She imagined walking up to his door and knocking and watching his face shift through surprise, and then understanding, and then something she had not seen on his face in a long time. Genuine, unguarded joy. She imagined him reaching for the photograph. She imagined him not being able to speak, the same way she hadn't been able to speak in Dr. Farrow's parking lot. She imagined him pulling her close in the doorway of room 1408 and saying something imperfect and honest, the way he used to before he learned to say only the right things. She was still inside that imagined scene when she stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor. The hallway was quiet. The thick carpet absorbed everything. Footsteps, sound, the particular weight of what she was carrying in her pocket. She could see his room from the elevator, 1408. The brass numbers were slightly crooked, the 4 tilted just enough that she noticed it. She was maybe 15 feet away when she heard the door handle. The woman who came out of room 1408 was not someone Elena recognized. She was dark-haired, mid-30s, with the kind of easy attractiveness that requires almost no maintenance to sustain. She was carrying a small bag over one shoulder, and she was wearing— Elena saw it in the first half second and spent the next several seconds trying to argue herself out of what she was seeing— a white button-down shirt, monogrammed at the breast pocket. CM Cassian had 6 of those shirts. Elena had ordered them herself 3 years ago from a tailor in Milan who charged an amount that still embarrassed her to think about. The initials had been her idea. The woman walked toward the elevator without looking up. Elena did not move. She was standing close enough to the wall that maybe the woman simply didn't notice her. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, she passed within arm's reach of Elena, pressed the elevator button, and stood waiting with the total absence of self-consciousness belonging to someone who had nothing in the world to hide. The elevator arrived. The woman stepped in. The doors closed. Elena stood alone in the hallway. Her hand was inside her coat pocket. She was touching the photograph without realizing she was doing it. The edges of the paper had gone slightly soft from how many times she had handled it in the past 2 days. She did not knock on Cassian's door. She stood there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably only 30 or 40 seconds. Long enough to understand that whatever she had rehearsed in the car was gone. Long enough to understand that the words she had been arranging and rearranging for 2 days belonged to a different morning. A morning where she had walked down this hallway and found nothing except a slightly crooked room number and her husband on the other side of a door. Then she put both hands in her pockets and walked back to the elevator. She drove home. She did not cry this time in the parking lot. She did not cry at all. She sat in her car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes, and she thought about the last 4 years with the particular detached clarity of someone who has had a large piece of information quietly rearranged. She thought about the cold side of the bed. She thought about the single coffee cup. She thought about the 3 miscarriages before this pregnancy, which she had gone through largely alone because Cassian had been in a different city for 2 of them and physically present but completely unreachable for the 3rd. She thought about the woman's walk. Not guilty, not hurried, just walking. She went inside, put the photograph in the top drawer of her nightstand, and did not take Cassian's call that evening, or the one the following morning. When she finally picked up on the 3rd call Saturday afternoon, her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. "I was at the Harrington yesterday," she said. A pause. "You came to see me?" "I came to tell you something." She had decided she would not tell him what. Not yet. Not over a phone call. "I was outside your room. I saw a woman leave." Another pause, but different, shorter, sharper. "What?" "She was wearing your shirt, Cassian, the white one, with your initials." Elena, I don't want an explanation right now." She meant that. Whatever he said next would either be a lie or a truth she wasn't equipped to hear through a phone speaker. "I need time." "Elena, there was no woman in my room." She had expected that. She had prepared for it in the way you prepare for something you already believe is coming. "I saw her. I'm telling you, I saw her." Her voice did not rise. She said it the way you say a fact, because to her it was one. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." She had hung up before he could speak again. She was at a friend's apartment, Mara, who asked no questions and stocked the refrigerator with Elena's preferred brand of sparkling water without being asked, within 2 hours. She used her maiden name, Voss, on the lease she signed 3 days later for a small apartment across the city. It was on the 5th floor of a building that had a working elevator and a window that faced west, and it was the first space she had occupied entirely on her own terms since before she married Cassian Moretti. She had not intended it to become a refuge. She had not intended most of the things it became. Meanwhile, 60 blocks north of where Elena was quietly assembling her solitary existence, Cassian Moretti was coming apart at the seams in the way powerful men come apart. Not visibly, not dramatically, but with a kind of contained fury that his staff recognized and stepped back from, the way you step back from something that might or might not explode. He had called the hotel within an hour of Elena hanging up. He had spoken to the manager, the front desk, the head of security. He had used every ounce of the particular weight his name carried in this city, and he had demanded to see the security footage from the 14th floor corridor on Thursday morning. What he saw on that screen made him sit down. There she was. Dark hair, small bag, white shirt. She walked out of his door, room 1408, the room he had occupied alone, at 9:47 in the morning, 2 minutes before Elena would have arrived based on the timestamp of Elena's elevator ride that Cassian's security team pulled from a different camera. 2 minutes. Elena had rounded the corner in time to watch a stranger walk away from her husband's room, and the stranger had been so perfectly timed that it was almost mathematical. Cassian watched the footage 3 times. He had not seen this woman before. He was certain of that. He had not invited her. He had not spoken to her. She had walked out of his room, the room he had left at 8:15 to go down to a breakfast meeting and returned to at 11, at a time when he was 2 floors below in the hotel restaurant being bored by a property lawyer named Hendricks. He called Silas. Silas Romano had been at Cassian's right hand for 11 years. They had met when Cassian was 28 and Silas was 33, during a period when Cassian's father was still alive and the organization was still held together mostly by fear and the kind of inherited loyalty that survives until it doesn't. Silas had been recommended by 3 separate men whose judgment Cassian trusted. He was methodical where Cassian was impulsive, patient where Cassian was demanding, and he had an ability to see around corners that Cassian had come to depend on in the way you come to depend on a thing so completely you stop noticing it's there. "Someone set me up," Cassian said when Silas picked up. There was a half-second of silence. "Tell me," Cassian told him. Silas listened without interrupting, which was one of his habits that Cassian had always found either reassuring or unnerving depending on the context. When Cassian finished, Silas was quiet for another moment, and then he said, "Give me 48 hours. "I don't have 48 hours. "You have more than you think." Silas's voice was even, practical. "Elena isn't going anywhere tonight. Give me the time to find out who arranged this so we're not walking into a conversation with your wife holding a theory instead of a name." Cassian stared at the frozen frame on the security footage, the woman in his hallway, mid-stride, looking at nothing, and agreed. 48 hours. It was the kind of decision that felt reasonable in the moment and catastrophic in retrospect. Because while Cassian spent 48 hours believing that solving the puzzle would repair the damage, Elena spent those same 48 hours reaching a different kind of clarity entirely. Not the frantic clarity of betrayal. She had moved through the worst of that in Mara's guest room on the first night. What arrived instead was quieter, and in certain ways, more permanent. She sat in her new apartment with its west-facing window and its second-hand furniture, and she thought about the marriage without the shock of Thursday morning attached to it. She thought about what the marriage had actually been, not the version she had told herself during the years when she was still waiting for it to become something. The version where Cassian's absences were temporary, where his inaccessibility was a side effect of circumstance rather than character, where the man she had seen in brief flashes during their first year was still there underneath all of it, waiting to emerge. The other version. The version where the woman in the hallway was almost beside the point. She was not ready to say any of this to Cassian. She was not even ready to fully say it to herself. But it was there, solid and undeniable, sitting in the back of the new apartment like a piece of furniture that had always been in the room, and she was only now noticing. She had her prenatal vitamins. She had her sparkling water. She had the ultrasound photograph in the drawer of her nightstand, which she was still not ready to share. She was 11 weeks further along than Cassian knew. She had 3 weeks before he would even know she was pregnant. She had not decided yet whether that felt like power or punishment. Meanwhile, Silas's 48 hours produced results. The woman's name, or rather, the name she had been using, was Margaret Calloway. The reservation for room 1408 had been made in that name 5 weeks earlier, paid in cash via a third-party booking arrangement that dead-ended in a shell company registered in Delaware. The shirt was a perfect duplicate, manufactured using dimensions obtained, Silas suspected, from one of Cassian's tailors, a breach of information that alone was worth pursuing. The false identity went 3 layers deep before it started disintegrating. This was not an affair. This was not a coincidence. Someone had built this, designed it, rehearsed it, timed it with precision that still made the back of Cassian's neck go cold when he thought about those 2 minutes. Elena's elevator timestamp at 9:49. The woman's departure from the room at 9:47. The margin was not accidental. Someone had known Elena was coming, had known she was coming that morning at that time to that floor. The only people who knew about the Harrington were Silas and 2 others in his inner circle. Cassian did not arrive at that conclusion yet. He filed it in the back of his mind in the way you file something uncomfortable when you have a more pressing problem in front of you. The more pressing problem was Elena. He reached her on the 7th day. She had agreed in a text message of 31 words to meet him. He had driven to a coffee shop on a street he did not know, chosen by her, and he had arrived 12 minutes early and sat at a corner table watching the door. When she came in, she was wearing a navy coat he didn't recognize, and she looked not different exactly, but settled in a way that alarmed him. The frantic pain he'd been imagining, the pain he'd been preparing to argue against and apologize through and explain away, it wasn't there. What was there was worse. She looked like someone who had made peace with something. He stood when she approached the table. She sat without touching him. "I know what happened," he said. He meant to ease into it. He heard himself skip everything he'd planned. "It was staged. Someone manufactured the whole thing. I have proof." Elena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Okay." That was not the response he'd expected. "Elena, she was never there before. I've never seen that woman in my life. Someone placed her." "I believe you," Elena said. He stopped. She looked at him across the table, and her face was steady, and she said it again. "Cassian, I believe you. I think someone set you up. I think the woman in the hallway was exactly what you're saying she was." A pause. "That's not why I left." The words landed with a weight that the conversation, up to that moment, had not prepared him for. "Then why?" "Because I was bringing you something." She said it quietly, still with both hands around her cup. "I drove to that hotel to tell you something important, and I stood in that hallway, and I watched a woman walk out of your room, and in that moment, the most devastating part wasn't what I thought you'd done." She looked at him. It was realizing that even if none of it was real, even if there was no woman, no shirt, no betrayal, I still would have driven back home alone. Because I don't know how to reach you, Cassian. I stopped knowing how a long time ago, and I stopped trying not long after that. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Someone's child knocked a cup off a table nearby. The music overhead was something forgettable. Cassian was aware of none of it. "I've been sitting in that apartment for a week," Elena continued, "and I keep thinking, the woman in the hallway didn't break us. She just showed up at a break that was already there." Cassian had no defense for that. He had prepared a defense. He had documents. He had the surveillance footage on his phone. He had names, shell companies, tailoring receipts, the whole architecture of Silas's investigation. He had everything except an answer to what she'd just said. He said, "What were you bringing me?" Elena looked at him for a long moment. "A week," she said instead of answering. "Give me one more week, then we'll talk." He wanted to push. She could see him wanting to push. But he sat back instead and nodded, and for a brief moment he looked less like the man the city feared and more like a man who didn't know what to do with his hands. That was the closest thing to the man she'd married that she'd seen in almost a year. She drove back to her apartment. That night she felt something. She was almost asleep, lying on her side in the second-hand bed, when her hand drifted to her stomach and she felt faint, unmistakable, like someone turning a page in a book pressed flat against her skin. The first movement. She lay very still. It came again. She stayed awake for another hour after that, waiting, her hand perfectly still against the slight curve that had been there for weeks now, and that she had hidden inside loose sweaters and strategic coat choices. Outside the west window, the city did its ordinary nighttime things. Cars, distant sirens, the particular murmur of a city that never finishes its conversations. Inside, something small and alive reminded her it was there. She had not told Cassian she was pregnant. She had not told anyone except Mara, who had guessed within 3 days of Elena's arrival and simply added prenatal vitamins to the grocery list without comment. She planned to tell him in 1 week. She had not yet decided if she was certain she would. And 60 blocks north, at roughly the same hour, Silas Romano was on the phone. Elena did not know this, could not have known this. He was speaking to someone whose name mattered less than what he was arranging. The reunion Cassian was planning, the conversation that was supposed to happen in 1 week, the careful and painful beginning of something. All of it was a problem that required a solution. The solution was already being prepared. And Elena, lying alone in her second-hand bed, with one hand on her stomach and the city murmuring outside her window, had no idea that by the time Cassian's week was up, The choice of whether or not to tell him about their son would no longer be entirely hers to make. The footsteps started on the third night. Elena had not told anyone her new address except Mara, and Mara was the kind of woman who treated other people's secrets the way a vault treats cash. Sealed, protected, not up for discussion. So when Elena heard the footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, she told herself it was a neighbor. New building, new sounds. She was still learning the rhythms of this place, which radiator ticked at 2 in the morning, which stair creaked under anyone over 160 pounds, which neighbor got home late smelling of restaurant grease. She turned over and went back to sleep. The second time was Thursday. She was in the kitchen at 9 in the evening, standing at the counter eating crackers because the smell of cooked food had started doing something unpleasant to her that she hadn't expected, and the pregnancy books Mara had silently left on her coffee table described as perfectly normal. She heard it then. Not footsteps exactly. More like a pause. The particular quality of silence that arrives when someone in a hallway stops moving. She stood very still with a cracker halfway to her mouth. The silence lasted maybe 8 seconds. Then she heard the elevator down the hall, and ordinary sounds returned, and she ate her cracker and told herself she was living alone for the first time in 4 years, and her nervous system needed time to recalibrate. The third time, she didn't need to tell herself anything. She came home on Saturday afternoon carrying groceries. The specific and slightly humiliating groceries of someone whose appetite had narrowed to saltines, cold fruit, and whatever the baby seemed to tolerate that week. And she noticed the doormat outside her apartment had been moved 18 inches to the left, which was not where she had placed it, and was not somewhere it would drift on its own. She stood in this hallway for a full 30 seconds studying it. Then she went inside, put the groceries away with hands that she noticed were not entirely steady, and sat on the edge of her bed. She picked up her phone. She scrolled past Cassian's name twice before she stopped scrolling. She had not called him since the coffee shop. They had exchanged 4 text messages, practical and brief, and the week she had asked him for was 4 days from expiring. She had spent those 4 days deciding what she would say when it did. She had the words mostly assembled. She had imagined the scene in the same way she had imagined the hotel hallway. The careful, scene-by-scene rehearsal of a person who knows a hard conversation is coming and would rather be prepared for it than blindsided. She put the phone down without calling. She moved the doormat back to where she'd placed it originally and told herself she would call Cassian in 4 days, as planned, and tell him everything in the right order, in the right way, when she was ready. She was not ready. She was also, it was becoming clear, not alone. She just didn't know that yet with enough certainty to act on it. 60 blocks north, Silas Rameau was having a different kind of week. The investigation Cassian had asked him to run had produced more information than Silas had anticipated, which was a problem, because Silas was also the source of the information the investigation was producing. He had spent 11 years being methodical, and he was being methodical now, feeding Cassian exactly enough to keep him oriented toward external enemies and away from the interior of his own organization. It was the kind of navigation that required patience and precision, and Silas had both. He had been patient for 11 years. He could be patient a while longer. What he had not fully accounted for was Cassian's investigator. His name was Decker. He was not part of the organization in any formal sense. Cassian used him the way you use a specialist, for specific problems that required someone outside the usual structure. He was 41 years old, and he had the appearance of a man who had slept badly every night since his mid-30s, which gave him a kind of useful invisibility in most rooms. People did not worry about men who looked like Decker. Cassian had called Decker 4 days after the coffee shop meeting without telling Silas he was doing it. That was new. In 11 years, there had been almost nothing Cassian did without telling Silas he was doing it. That was the nature of the relationship. Cassian's operations depended on Silas's visibility into them. An independent move, a quiet call to an outside investigator, paid separately, unknown to the usual channels, was a crack in a pattern that Silas had always been able to rely on. He found out about Decker on the 5th day, which was already 2 days later than he would have liked. He did not tell Cassian he knew. Instead, he brought Cassian a name. Marcus Vale, Silas said. They were in Cassian's office on the 42nd floor, which had a view of the harbor that Cassian had stopped noticing years ago. Silas placed a folder on the desk. Small operation, works freelance. We've had friction with him twice before. The Colton Street situation 2 years ago and something before that didn't amount to anything. He has the capability to have arranged the hotel setup. Motive's a stretch, but it exists. Cassian opened the folder. His eyes moved across the pages with the speed of a man who reads everything fast, because he has spent his adult life with too much to read. How confident? 70%. Cassian tapped one of the pages. Who else could have known Elena was coming to the hotel that morning? Someone in her circle, or someone watching her. She doesn't have a circle that overlaps with Vale. No. Silas kept his voice even, which suggests surveillance. Cassian closed the folder. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the harbor that he didn't see. Then he said, I want to know who else knew. I'm already looking. Look faster. He pushed the folder back across the desk. And Silas, I need Elena's location secure, wherever she is. Of course. Silas took the folder and left. In the elevator on the way down, he stood very still and did the particular math that the conversation had required him to do. Cassian was asking about Elena's location, which meant Cassian didn't fully have it, which was either Elena protecting herself or Elena not trusting him with it yet. Either way, it was information Silas had already obtained through channels Cassian didn't know about. He knew where Elena was. He had known for 5 days. He stepped out of the elevator into the parking garage and made a phone call. The weekend's in 4 days, he said when the call connected. After that, they talk. A pause on the other end. And? Before they talk, Silas said, I want her scared. He hung up. He stood in the concrete quiet of the parking garage for a moment longer. He was not a man who experienced guilt in any functional sense, but he was a man who understood the weight of decisions, and he felt that weight now the way you feel weather changing, not in any single place, but distributed everywhere at once. He had thought about this for 11 years. He had built it carefully, one layer at a time, and he was not going to lose his nerve 4 days from the end, because a woman he did not know was living alone in an apartment with a moved doormat and a child she hadn't told anyone about. He walked to his car. He drove north. The 4 days were actually 3, because Elena called Cassian on the Tuesday morning 2 days before the end of the week she'd asked for, and she did not call him because she was ready. She called him because at 11 the previous night, someone had tried her door handle. Not knocked. Tried the handle. She had been on her way to the bathroom when she heard it. The specific, unmistakable sound of a latch being tested from the outside, careful and quiet. The kind of testing that stops immediately when it doesn't give. She had stood in her hallway in the dark for a long moment, not breathing in any useful way, and then she had gone back to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in both hands, and spent the next 40 minutes deciding whether she was being paranoid or being right. At 7 in the morning, she decided she was being right. She called Cassian at 7:12. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he had not been asleep. Someone tried my door last night, she said. She had decided she would not lead into it. A pause. She could hear him process it. Are you hurt? No, they didn't get in, but Cassian... She stopped. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach and felt the slight, reassuring solidity of her own body. Someone knows where I am. He was already moving. She could hear it. The shift in background sound. The particular quality of motion in the way his voice changed. I'm coming. I'm not asking you to... I'm coming. Not aggressive, just final, in the way he could be final without raising his voice. Don't open the door to anyone, don't go outside, I'll be there in... A brief pause she understood was him calculating 25 minutes. Cassian, I need to tell you something first. Tell me when I'm there. It can't wait until you're here. Silence. I'm pregnant, Elena said. The silence lasted a full 4 seconds, which was a long time for a phone call. She sat on the edge of her bed in the early morning light and listened to her husband not speak. 15 weeks, she said. I was bringing you the ultrasound photograph the morning I went to the hotel. Another 3 seconds. It's a boy, she said. She heard him breathe. One long, unsteady breath. The kind that happens when a person is trying to keep their face arranged correctly and their body won't cooperate. She had heard Cassian control his breathing through situations that would have made other men fall apart, and this was not that. This was different. This was a man being moved by something against his will. "I'll be there in 25 minutes, he said. His voice was the same, technically, but it wasn't. "Okay," she said. She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her lap. Outside the window, the sky was doing its slow Tuesday morning thing, clouds moving in from the northwest at a pace that suggested rain by afternoon. She put her hand back on her stomach. 25 minutes, she said to no one in particular. She was at the window watching the street below when she saw the car. It was parked across from her building, dark blue, engine off, and it had been there when she looked out at 7:15, and it was still there at 7:38. She watched it for another 2 minutes. The driver did not get out. Nobody approached it. It just sat there in the way cars sit when someone has decided they will wait as long as it takes. She stepped back from the window. She put her shoes on, her coat, her bag with the important things, the prenatal vitamins, the small bundle of papers she had been organizing for the past week, the ultrasound photograph. She was in the kitchen drinking water she didn't want when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not Cassian. Too early and wrong weight. Lighter, two people, coordinated. They stopped outside her door. She set the glass down on the counter so carefully it made no sound. The knock, when it came, was not the knock of someone who wanted her to feel safe about opening the door. It was 3 hard raps, flat and demanding, the knock of an authority that wasn't official. She was already in the hallway. She was already at the fire escape window. She had noticed the fire escape on her 3rd day in the apartment, which was the same day she had noticed there was no back exit and the only stairwell exited at the front of the building. She had noticed it the way she had spent the past 4 years noticing exits, quietly, without making it a thing, the habit of a woman who had learned to inventory escape routes without fully admitting to herself why she was doing it. She went out the window. The fire escape was wet from overnight rain, the metal grating slick and cold under her palms when she gripped the railing. 5 floors down to the alley. She went fast, not running. Running on wet metal is how you fall. But efficiently, one landing at a time, her bag against her side, one hand always on the rail. 3 floors down, she heard the window above her open. She did not look up. She hit the alley at the bottom and walked, not ran, walked, to the street at the far end that led out 2 blocks from her building. She was around the corner before she heard anything useful, and then she was just a woman on a Tuesday morning sidewalk with a bag over her shoulder and rain starting to come down in the thin, indifferent way it does before it commits to anything. She called Cassian. "I'm outside," she said when he picked up. "Alley side, 2 blocks east of my building. There were people at my door." 3 seconds. "Don't move." "I'm moving. I'm walking east." "Elena?" "I'm not standing in one place." She kept walking. "Come east. I'll keep the phone on." She heard the engine of his car through the phone, the particular sound of it accelerating, and she kept walking with the phone pressed to her ear and the rain starting in earnest now, and she did not run. She walked with her hand against her side where the bag pressed against her stomach, and she breathed the way you breathe when you are trying not to be the thing you feel like, which was frightened, which was alone, which was a woman who had left her husband and discovered that the space she'd walked into was not safe. She had been walking 4 minutes when his SUV came around the corner and pulled to the curb. She got in. The door wasn't fully closed before he pulled back into traffic. She could see from the set of his jaw that he was doing the thing he did when he was furious and could not afford to be furious, which was go very still, every muscle arranged into control, his hands perfectly measured on the wheel. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Elena sat with her bag in her lap and her wet coat and the rain coming down against the windows, and she waited. "Are you hurt?" he finally said. "No." "The baby?" "We're both fine." He exhaled. Not the controlled, even exhalation of a man managing himself. Something cracked in the middle of it, something that had been held together too tightly for too long. He drove another block. "Who knew your address?" he said. "Mara. No one else." "Mara wouldn't—" "No, she wouldn't." Another block. He took a right, then a quick left, the route of someone who is not going somewhere as much as creating space between himself and the place they came from. "Then someone found you," he said. "And someone who found you is connected to someone who knew Elena Voss had an apartment on the east side, which means they were watching you from before you even moved in." She had arrived at that conclusion at approximately 7:30 while watching the dark car below her window. "How long?" she said. "I don't know yet." "Cassian." She turned to look at him. How long has someone been watching me? He glanced at her, just once, briefly. I don't know. Decker is working on it. Who's Decker? Someone I trust outside the organization. He said it with a flatness that told her this was deliberate. Outside the organization, separate, unknown to whoever else was in the organization. She filed that away. Why outside? A pause. He made another turn and then he said, because I'm not sure the inside is clean. The words settled between them in the car. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and took out the ultrasound photograph, the one she had printed at the drugstore 9 days ago, and carried in her pocket to a hotel she had left without knocking on the door she came to knock on. She held it out. He stopped at a red light. He looked at the photograph. She watched him look at it, watched his face do the thing it had done on the phone when she told him, the same involuntary shift, the same loss of whatever arrangement he normally maintained. He looked at the small gray image with its white annotations and its measurements and the tiny curved shape that the doctor had pointed to and said, boy, and Cassian Moretti, who had not visibly lost his composure in 11 years of running an organization that required composure as a survival skill, pressed his lips together very hard. The light turned green. He didn't move. The car behind them honked. He drove. You carried this to the hotel, he said. Not a question. Yes. You were going to tell you in person. Yes. He was quiet for 3 blocks. And you saw her come out, he said, while you were carrying that. Yes. She watched his jaw tighten, not at her. The tightening wasn't directed at her, which she noticed because it would have been easy to misdirect, easy to aim the anger somewhere available rather than somewhere accurate. He was aiming it accurately. I'm going to find who did this, he said. I know. She put the photograph back in her bag. But Cassian, what happened at the hotel? Even if you'd already proved it to me, even if I had believed you completely on the phone the first day. She paused. I still needed to leave. You understand that. He didn't answer immediately. The marriage, she said. Not you. I'm not saying you're a bad man. I'm saying we built something that wasn't working and we both let it keep not working for a long time. I know. I need you to actually know it, not just say it. Elena, he glanced at her again, longer this time. I know. She looked at him. He was exhausted. She could see it in the way he was holding himself, the effort in his shoulders, the particular tiredness of a man who has not slept properly in over a week and is running on something less sustainable than sleep. Where are we going? She said. Somewhere safe. How do you know it's safe? Because Silas doesn't know about it. He said it carefully, without inflection, as if he was testing the weight of the sentence. There are maybe 4 properties I've held completely off the books. This is one of them. Elena absorbed that. Are you telling me you suspect Silas? Another long pause. I'm telling you I don't know what I suspect yet, and until I know, I'm not taking chances. She nodded once and turned to look out the rain-streaked window. They drove for 20 minutes in something that was not exactly silence. The car had its sounds, the city had its sounds, the rain had its sounds, but was not conversation either. It was the particular quiet of 2 people who have things to say and are choosing the order carefully. The safe house was a brownstone in a part of the city that had the particular anonymity of neighborhoods in transition, half renovated, half waiting to be renovated, the kind of street where everyone is too preoccupied with their own changes to notice anyone else's. Cassian pulled into a side entrance behind the building. He cut the engine. How many people know about this place? Elena asked. 2. One of them is me. And the other one? Dead? He said it without drama, without the particular flourish some men use to signal danger. Just a fact. 12 years ago. She nodded. They went inside. The brownstone was furnished in the plain, functional way of a space that has never pretended to be a home. Clean, organized, everything necessary, and nothing extra. Elena walked through the main room and the kitchen and stood in the hallway for a moment. She noticed the locks. Good locks. Multiple. She noticed the windows. Not the view, the glass, which was the kind of glass that didn't behave the way ordinary glass behaves. She turned to find Cassian watching her do it. You're cataloging exits, he said. Habit. When did that become a habit? She looked at him steadily. About 2 years into our marriage. He absorbed that. She went to the kitchen and found a glass and filled it with water and stood at the counter drinking it slowly. He came and stood on the other side of the counter. The kitchen was small enough that they were closer together than they had been in the car, which had its own kind of pressure. "Tell me about Silas," she said. "There's nothing to tell yet." "Cassian?" She set the glass down. "I went down a fire escape this morning. I'm standing in a house that officially doesn't exist. Tell me what you actually think." He was quiet for a moment. He put both hands flat on the counter. He looked at them, then up at her. "The hotel reservation was made 5 weeks ago," he said. "At that point, the only people who knew I was staying at the Harrington were 3 men in my inner circle, Silas and 2 others." He paused. "Decker has been tracking the shell company that paid for the room. It dead ends in a financial structure that, the architecture of it, the way it's layered, it matches a method Silas used for a legitimate project 4 years ago." He stopped. Elena waited. "Which could be coincidence," he said. "But you don't think it is?" He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Silas has been with me since before my father died. He knows every weakness in this organization. He knows where everything is buried, literally and otherwise." He looked up at her. "If it's him, then the investigation he's been running for you has been controlled from the inside," Elena said. Cassian looked at her. "I'm not as outside this world as you think," she said quietly. "I've been married to you for 4 years. I've been paying attention even when you didn't know I was." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, not in any way that would register to someone who hadn't been watching him for 4 years. But Elena was watching, and she saw it. "What do you need?" he said. Not to the problem, to her. "Right now, here. What do you need?" She had not been asked that question, she realized, in a very long time. "Food," she said. "I need something I can actually eat. Crackers or fruit or something plain. And somewhere to sit down." He moved to the cabinets. She watched him open 3 cabinets before he found crackers. He put them on the counter. He found a bowl, opened the refrigerator, stocked, she noticed, which meant someone had prepared the place recently, and put grapes into the bowl. He slid both across the counter to her. She sat at the kitchen table and ate crackers and grapes while her husband stood at the counter and watched her with his phone in his hand and the particular expression of a man who is trying very hard not to look as shaken as he is. "How long until Decker has something solid?" she asked. 24 hours. Maybe less. "And if it's Silas?" Cassian looked at his phone. "Then I'll have to make a choice I've been hoping I wouldn't have to make." Elena ate a grape and said nothing. She knew what choice he meant. She also knew, sitting in this safe house on this Tuesday morning with rain on the windows and a baby turning occasional slow somersaults in a space he didn't yet know was suddenly less safe than it had been an hour ago, that the choice he made would be the thing their son grew up knowing about his father, whether he knew it directly or not. She didn't say any of that, not yet. Outside, the rain committed to itself. Inside, Cassian's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His face did the terrible stillness it did when something was bad. "It's Decker," he said. He answered it. He did not put it on speaker, which she understood, information he wasn't sure yet how much to share, and she sat at the kitchen table and ate crackers and watched his face as he listened, which was the only version of the conversation available to her. What she saw in his face over the next 3 minutes was not what she expected to see. She had expected anger. She had expected the specific, consolidated fury of a man discovering his worst suspicion confirmed. What she saw instead was something quieter and somehow worse, the expression of a man losing something he had spent 11 years considering permanent, not rage, grief. The particular grief of someone watching a version of their life they had believed in prove itself to be something else entirely. He lowered the phone. He stood at the counter of the off-the-book safe house in the rain-soaked Tuesday morning and did not speak for a long enough moment that Elena put down her cracker. "Tell me," she said. "The shirt," he said. "The tailor who duplicated it." He stopped. He pressed one hand flat against the counter. "Silas placed the order. He used an intermediary and a different account, but Decker traced it back." He stopped again. 11 years. Elena looked at him. "He's been at my side for 11 years, Cassian said. "He helped me bury my father. He helped me build—" He stopped. He turned and put both hands on the edge of the counter and dropped his head. Just briefly. Just long enough. Elena did not say anything. She had learned in 4 years of marriage to a man who rarely allowed himself to be witnessed in moments like this, that the worst thing you could do was fill the space with reassurance he hadn't asked for. She let the moment exist. He straightened, his face rearranged. Not back to normal, to something adjacent to normal, something that would pass for composure in low light. "I need to meet him," Cassian said. "I need to look at him and hear what he says." "That's dangerous." "Yes." "If he already knows Decker is close," "He does," Cassian said. "I'd bet on it. Which means every hour I wait is an hour he uses." He pushed off the counter. "I'm going to call him now. Set a meeting for tonight. Private." He looked at her. "You stay here. Don't open the door to anyone. I mean anyone." "Cassian, Elena." He looked at her with something that was not quite desperation, but was in that neighborhood. "Please." She looked back at him. "There's a phone on the counter," he said. "Untraceable. Has one number in it. A man named Fenn. If anything feels wrong before I'm back, you call that number. He'll be here in 8 minutes." She looked at the phone. It was a cheap plastic burner, the kind you bought at a gas station, slightly scuffed. She picked it up. 8 minutes, she said. 8 minutes. He was already at the door. He stopped. He turned back. He looked at her sitting at the kitchen table with crackers and grapes and the burner phone, and something moved across his face that she had not seen there in a long time. "When I get back," he said, "I want to hear about the appointment, what the doctor said, what he looked like." She looked at him. "On the screen," he said. "What he looked like on the screen." Her throat did something inconvenient. "Okay," she said. He left. She sat alone in the quiet brownstone and listened to the rain and ate the rest of the grapes and did not let herself think too much about where he was going, because thinking about it would not change where he was going. And there were things she could control today and things she could not. And the line between them was something she had spent the past week getting very clear on. At 7:43 that evening, Cassian walked into a private room at a restaurant in the warehouse district that he and Silas had used for quiet meetings for 9 years. Silas was already there. He was sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of water in front of him. Not wine, not whiskey, water. And he looked exactly as he always looked, composed, measured, the expression of a man who had heard everything twice already and was patiently waiting for the rest. He was 61 years old, and he had the kind of stillness that comes from either wisdom or damage. And Cassian had spent 11 years believing it was wisdom. "Sit down," Silas said. Cassian sat. They looked at each other across the table. "You found the tailor," Silas said. Not a question, not a denial, just a statement, delivered with the same flat calm he delivered everything, as if the sentence were any other sentence. Cassian said nothing. "I wondered how long it would take." Silas picked up the glass of water and put it down without drinking. "Decker is good, better than I expected." A brief pause. "You should have used him years ago." "Silas, your father had my brother killed." His voice did not rise. It did not even change texture. "November, 11 years before you and I met. A dispute over a distribution arrangement that your father decided would be resolved permanently." He looked at Cassian. "I've thought about telling you that for 11 years. Every time I almost did, I decided the information was more useful where it was." "Where it was," Cassian said carefully, "was inside a man I trusted with everything." "Yes." Silas held his gaze. "That was exactly where it was." The room was very quiet. The restaurant sounds, kitchen, distant voices, the ordinary machinery of a public place came through the walls at a muffled remove. "The hotel," Cassian said. "Elena." "Yes." "You timed it. You knew she was coming." "I arranged for her to come." Silas's voice was still even. "A suggestion through channels she didn't know were mine. A message to Mara, her friend, implying you'd been asking about Elena, that it might be a good moment to reach out. The timing handled itself." Cassian looked at him. "I didn't want her hurt," Silas said. "I want you to know that. The intent was never physical. I wanted you to lose the one thing." He stopped. A brief pause, the first sign of anything unsettled. "You understand better than anyone what it costs to have something taken. Your father understood that. He took accordingly." I'm not my father. No. For the first time, something moved in Silas's face, which made it more complicated. Cassian put both hands on the table. He was holding himself very carefully, the way you hold something fragile while carrying it over broken ground. She went down a fire escape this morning, he said. 15 weeks pregnant, wet metal, 5 floors. Silas's expression shifted. You put men outside her door, Cassian said. You put men outside her door while she was carrying my son. The word son landed in the room with a weight that neither of them had prepared for. Silas set down his glass. I didn't know about the child, he said, quietly. That wasn't... He stopped. For the first time in 11 years, Cassian watched Silas Romano not finish a sentence. It wasn't what? Cassian said. Part of the plan? Did the plan have limits, Silas? Were there things that were off the table? His voice was still controlled. Barely. Because a woman who didn't choose any of this went down a wet fire escape this morning because you put men outside her door. Silence. Then Silas reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. He turned the screen toward Cassian. A message glowed on it. 3 words and a location. We have her. Cassian stared at the screen. He understood in the next 2 seconds that the meeting, this room, this careful conversation with its even voices and its accounting of old wounds, had never been the point. The meeting was the distraction. While Cassian sat here listening to 11 years of concealed motive unpack itself across a restaurant table, someone had gone to the brownstone. The brownstone that Silas wasn't supposed to know about. That no one was supposed to know about. Cassian's hand went to his phone. He called Elena's number. It rang 4 times. Then it went to voicemail. He called the burner. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. He was already standing when he called Fenn's number. Fenn answered on the first ring. The brownstone, Cassian said. Now. Already on my way, Fenn said. I got there 8 minutes ago. Cassian. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be terrible. She's not here. Cassian stood with the phone at his ear and looked at Silas Romano across the restaurant table. Silas looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Silas picked up his glass of water and set it down again, and in the gesture was 11 years of patience and 3 words glowing on a phone screen, and whatever Cassian had imagined this conversation might eventually become, whatever road he had thought was in front of him tonight, Cassian moved before the thought was fully formed. He was around the table and through the restaurant door in the time it took Silas to set down his glass, and he did not look back, because looking back at Silas right now would cost him something he could not afford to spend. The particular controlled fury that was the only thing keeping his legs moving in the right direction instead of back toward that table to do something that could not be undone in a restaurant with witnesses and cameras and a maitre d' who would remember everything. He hit the street at a run. His driver was at the curb. Cassian had sent a text from the table 4 minutes into the conversation, a single word that meant be ready, because he had learned a long time ago that the most important part of any meeting was the exit, and the SUV was already moving before the door was fully closed. Warehouse District, Cassian said. Delm Road. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. Which one? All of them. Start at the north end. He called Fenn again while the city moved past the windows in the dark. Anything? I'm canvassing the block, Fenn said. His voice had the tight economy of someone doing 2 things at once. No sign of forced entry on the brownstone. Front door was locked. Back entrance same. A brief pause. She left voluntarily or she was walked out? She didn't leave voluntarily. Then she was walked out quietly, professional. Another pause. Cassian, there are 2 properties Silas would have access to in this part of the city that you don't have on your records. I've been sitting on that information for 3 days because I wasn't sure enough. Cassian felt something cold move through his chest. Tell me now. A warehouse on Delm Road, and a property on the west side that he holds through a 4th-generation LLC. Delm Road is closer to the brownstone by 11 minutes. Delm Road, Cassian said to the driver. The driver accelerated. Cassian hung up and called 3 other numbers in quick succession, each call lasting under 30 seconds, each one deploying a piece of the network he had spent 20 years building for exactly the kind of emergency he had always hoped would never arrive. 6 men to Delm Road from the south, 4 from the east. 2 more as perimeter. Nobody moves until he is inside. He put the phone in his lap and looked out the window. He was thinking about the fire escape. The image of it, wet metal, 5 floors, Elena with her bag pressed against her side, had lodged somewhere behind his sternum and was producing a physical sensation that he recognized after a moment as the particular kind of fear that has nowhere to go. Not fear for himself. He had not been afraid for himself in a long time, perhaps ever, in any meaningful way. This was different. This was the fear that arrives when someone you cannot protect is already in danger you did not prevent. He had not protected her. He had put her in a house he believed was safe and driven across the city to have a conversation with the man who had been dismantling his life for months. And while he sat at that table being told the history of a grudge 11 years in the making, someone had gone to the brownstone and walked his pregnant wife out the door. His hands were in his lap. He looked at them. They were steady, which was not how he felt, but his hands had always been steadier than the rest of him. His father had said that once, a long time ago, in a context that was not a compliment. Cassian had made it one. The SUV turned onto Delm Road at 9:14. The road was industrial, warehouses on both sides, most of them dark, the particular darkness of buildings that are used during the day and abandoned at night. Sodium lights at intervals gave everything the flat orange color of old photographs. It had stopped raining, but the street was still wet, and the tires of the SUV made a sound on it like tearing paper. Cassian got out while the car was still slowing. The warehouse Decker had flagged was the third building on the right, a converted storage facility, maybe 60 years old, brick that had been painted over at some point and was now in the process of returning to brick. Loading dock on the east side. One entrance visible from the road. The lights inside were off, which meant nothing, because the windows were covered. Cassian stood on the wet street and looked at the building. Fen appeared at his right shoulder from somewhere. That was Fen's particular skill, arriving without transition, as if he had always been in the place he was suddenly standing in. 2 heat signatures inside, Fen said quietly. Southeast corner of the building. Thermal from the roof of the car across the street. He paused. 2 people. One stationary for the past 40 minutes. One moving around. Which one is stationary? Fen looked at him. The smaller one. Cassian walked towards the building. He did not wait for his other men to be in position. He understood that this was a breach of the operational logic he had drilled into everyone who worked for him. You establish perimeter before you breach. You confirm position before you move. You do not put yourself inside a building before you know what else is inside the building. He understood all of that, and he walked toward the building anyway, because Elena was the stationary signature in the southeast corner, and every additional minute was a minute he was not there. Fen moved with him without being asked. That was also Fen. The side entrance was unlocked, which was either careless or intentional, and both possibilities were bad in different ways. Cassian pushed through it slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dark interior before committing his body weight to the threshold. The warehouse smelled of old machine oil and something chemical, industrial solvent of some kind, old enough that the sharpness had faded to a memory. The floor was concrete. His footsteps on it were unavoidable, so he stopped trying to avoid them and moved fast instead. He could hear movement at the far end of the space. One person, not trying to be quiet, confident in their location. He moved along the east wall. Fen peeled left. The floor plan of the warehouse was simple. One large open space with a raised office area at the far south end, accessible by a metal staircase. Light came from the office. Not much, but enough to navigate by. Cassian was halfway across the floor when someone stepped out from behind a support column 12 feet to his left. He moved faster than we expected. The voice was male, mid-40s. The man it belonged to was large in the way that came from deliberate construction, shoulders, neck, hands. He was holding something at his side that caught the light from the office above in a way that removed any ambiguity about the conversation they were about to have. "Where is she?" Cassian said. "Upstairs." The man tilted his head toward the office. "She's fine. She's been fine. Step out of the way." "I can't do that." Cassian looked at him with the particular attention he had learned to give to men who believed their size resolved situations. He had been a thin, unremarkable-looking man his entire adult life. He had spent 20 years allowing people to make the mistake of assuming this. "You work for Silas," Cassian said. A small hesitation. "I work for whoever pays." Silas is done paying. Cassian kept his voice level. By this time tomorrow, his accounts are frozen, his operation is dismantled, and his name is a problem that resolves itself. Whoever is holding his money for you will be explaining themselves to people who are not patient. He paused. I'm telling you this because it's useful information. What you do with it is your decision. The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Cassian walked to the staircase. He climbed it without looking back. At the top, the office door was partially open. A square of pale yellow light, the sound of someone breathing in the particular pattern of a person trying to control their breathing and mostly succeeding. He pushed the door open. Elena was seated in a metal chair in the center of the small office, her wrists bound in front of her with a zip tie that was tight enough to leave marks but not tight enough to cut circulation. Her coat was still on. Her bag was on the floor beside her, intact. She was looking at the door when he came through it, and her face did the thing that made something inside Cassian's chest unlock with a physical sensation he felt all the way to his back teeth. She did not cry. He had not expected her to. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He crossed to her in 3 steps. He had a knife, the small one from his left jacket pocket, the one he had carried for 19 years with the same thoughtless consistency other men carried their wallets. And he had the zip tie cut before he was fully crouched in front of her. She looked at her wrists, rotated them once, carefully. "The baby," he started. "Fine. I'm fine. We're both fine." She looked up at him. Her voice was steady in the way voices are steady when steadiness is a decision rather than a state. "They didn't touch me. They weren't interested in hurting me. They were interested in having me." "I know." He stayed crouched in front of her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She stood, which she did entirely on her own without taking his offered hand, not because she was refusing it, but because she was Elena, and she stood up on her own. Then she picked up her bag from the floor and checked it, which he watched her do without comment. "My phone is gone. They took it at the brownstone." "I know. How did you find this place?" "Decker." She nodded once, absorbing that. Then she looked at him. "You were with Silas?" "Yes." "And?" Cassian stood. I was aware of the sounds below them, fun, and by now 2 or 3 of the others who had reached the building. Aware of the particular logistics of the next 20 minutes. He was also aware of Elena standing in front of him in a warehouse office under yellow light with zip tie marks on her wrists and her bag over her shoulder and the specific expression of a woman who has had a very bad night and has decided to be precise about it. "He confirmed everything," Cassian said. "His brother, my father, 11 years. He looked at her. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were in the middle of something that had nothing to do with you." "It had everything to do with me," Elena said. "I married into it." He held her gaze. "Yes." They stood there for a moment in the yellow light of the warehouse office. "Let's go," she said. They went down the stairs. The large man was gone. Cassian noted his absence without surprise. Phone was at the bottom, and 2 others behind him, and they moved through the warehouse floor and out the side entrance and into the orange-lit street, and Elena walked beside Cassian with her bag and her coat and her wrists that she kept together in front of her, even though they were no longer bound, which she noticed after a moment and separated with a small, deliberate movement. In the SUV, she sat beside him and looked straight ahead. She said, "What happens to Silas?" Cassian looked out his window at the passing warehouse district. "He'll be dealt with." "Cassian." Her voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet. There was a difference. "I need you to tell me what that means." He turned to look at her. She was looking at him with that expression, the one she had had in the coffee shop, in the kitchen of the safe house, in the car on Tuesday morning. The expression of someone who required precision rather than reassurance. "I don't know yet," he said, which was true, and he said it because she would know if it wasn't. She turned back to face forward. "Okay," she said. "Then we'll come back to it." They drove. At some point, around the 4th or 5th block, Elena said, "I felt him move again in the office when you came through the door." Cassian looked at her. "I think he recognized your footsteps," she said. There was something in her voice that was not quite a joke and not quite serious, and was exactly the thing she chose to say in that moment, which told him more than she probably intended. He said, Tell me what the doctor said. At the appointment. She looked at him. You promised, he said, moment. Then she said he was developing beautifully. His heartbeat is strong. He's in the right position. She said, a brief pause. She said he looked like a baby who had decided to arrive and was taking it seriously. Cassian looked at her. She has a sense of humor, Elena said. Dr. Farrow, I didn't expect it. Is she good? She's very good. He nodded. Outside, the city moved past. They were heading back toward the brownstone to collect whatever Elena needed, and then somewhere else that Cassian had already decided would not be any property connected to anything Silas had ever touched, which narrowed the options but did not eliminate them. Elena said, I want to know why he waited. Cassian looked at her. Silas, she said. He said 11 years. He's had 11 years. Why now? She turned to face Cassian. What changed? It was the question that had been sitting in the back of Cassian's mind since the restaurant table, pressing against everything else with the quiet insistence of a thing that mattered. I think, Cassian said carefully, that he waited until he decided I had something worth taking. Elena held his gaze. He didn't want to kill me, Cassian said. He said that. He wanted me to lose everything meaningful, Elena said. Yes. She absorbed this. She turned back to face the window. So as long as you had nothing that mattered, she said quietly, you were safe. More or less. And when I became something that mattered. He did not answer because she had stated it rather than asked it, and they both understood the arithmetic. I've been dangerous to you, she said, by being important to you. Elena, I'm not saying that as an accusation. She turned to look at him again. I'm saying it because I need to understand the shape of this. I need to understand what I married into and what our son is being born into. Her voice did not waver. Because I was already deciding what I wanted from this marriage before all of this. Before the hotel, before the apartment, before tonight. And that decision does not disappear because someone tried to use me as a weapon. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. What were you deciding? I was deciding, she said, whether there was still something here worth deciding about. The SUV was quiet. And, he said, ask me again when Silas is dealt with, she said, and when I know what dealt with means. He nodded slowly. They reached the brownstone. Elena went inside and came back in 7 minutes with a bag she had packed so efficiently that it told him she had probably been partially packing it since she moved in. A habit of preparedness, the habit of a woman who had learned not to be caught without options. She came out the front door and got back in the SUV and did not look at the building when they drove away. The cradle, she said. He looked at her. Silas knew about your father, she said. He knew everything about your family going back 22 years. If he was patient enough to wait 11 years. She stopped. Was there anything else? Anything he was building toward beyond just destroying your marriage? Cassian was quiet for a moment. He had been asking himself a version of this question since the restaurant, and the answer that kept arriving was the one he least wanted. The organization, he said. If Elena leaves, if my personal life collapses, if I'm destabilized. He stopped. A distracted man makes errors. An isolated man makes more of them. And a man who's been betrayed by the person he trusted most tends to either shut everything down or overreach. He paused. Either of those would have created openings. Openings for whom? For whoever Silas had been talking to, because a man who spent 11 years building something this elaborate was not building it for purely personal satisfaction. He looked at her. He had partners. People who stood to benefit from my organization fracturing. Elena absorbed this. So this was never just about punishing you, she said. No. It was a business arrangement dressed up as revenge. Cassian said nothing. Which means, Elena said slowly, that whoever those partners are, they're still out there. And Silas being exposed doesn't end that. No, Cassian said. It doesn't. She looked at him. Then what does end it? He said carefully, making the organization not worth the effort of destabilizing. She looked at him for a long time. He watched her understand what he meant, and watched her decide not to ask him to say it plainly yet, because they were in a moving car after a night that had included a warehouse and zip ties, and there would be time for the plain conversation later. She looked out the window again. Where are we going? She said. A hotel. Clean name. I'll have someone book it in the next 4 minutes under a name that doesn't exist yet. How long? One night. Tomorrow we figure out the next step together. He paused. Together. I mean that. She said nothing immediately. Then, okay. They were 20 minutes from the hotel when Cassian's phone rang. Not his regular phone, but the secondary one, the one with a number that almost no one had. He looked at the screen. Decker. He answered it. I found the partners, Decker said. He sounded like a man who had not slept in 36 hours, which was probably accurate. 3 of them. 2 are names you'll know. The third, a pause that lasted just long enough to be terrible. The third one is going to be a problem. Tell me. A pause. Cassian, Decker said. It's your cousin. The car continued moving through the city. The hotel was 18 minutes away. Elena was looking out her window at the lights. Cassian held the phone to his ear and felt the night rearrange itself into something with an entirely different shape than it had held an hour ago. Marco Moretti, his father's brother's son, 29 years old, quiet, kept himself at the edges of the organization, had always seemed more interested in his life outside it than in anything it could offer him. Cassian had protected him from the more difficult parts of the business for years. Had protected him deliberately and without making it a point, the way you protect someone younger who hasn't chosen the life. Marco, who had been at his father's memorial. Marco, who had called Cassian 3 weeks ago to ask how things were going, which was something he never did, which Cassian had filed under relatives doing awkward things at awkward times. Marco, who had sat across from Silas at a dinner 4 months ago that Cassian had thought nothing of. How deep? Cassian said. Deep enough, Decker said. He's been feeding information for 8 months, not just to Silas, to the external partners Silas was working with. He gave them Elena's address, Cassian, the apartment on the east side. He gave it to them 2 days after she moved in. Cassian was still. Elena felt the quality of the stillness and turned from the window to look at him. He did not look at her yet. He knew she was pregnant, Cassian said. A pause. I don't know. I don't have evidence of that. Find out. I will. Decker hesitated. There's one more thing. Tell me. The financial structure Silas built, the accounts, the shell companies, the funding for the hotel setup. A brief pause. Marco's name is on 3 of the foundational layers, not hidden, on them, which means if this goes to any kind of formal exposure, his name comes with it. Cassian absorbed this. He wasn't just feeding information, Decker said. He was invested, financially. He stood to receive a share of whatever came out of the organization fracturing. A pause. He bet against you, with his own name on the bet. Cassian lowered the phone. He sat in the moving SUV with his phone in his lap, and the city outside, and Elena watching him from the adjacent seat. And he thought about Marco sitting at that dinner 4 months ago, 29 years old with his outside life and his careful distance from the difficult parts of the business. And he thought about how long it took a person to decide to do something like this, and how many ordinary conversations must have happened between that decision and this car on this night. Cassian, Elena said quietly. He looked at her. She read his face, whatever was in it, and her own face did something complicated. Not fear. Something more patient than fear. Who? Marco, he said. She blinked. Once. Your cousin. Yes. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at her hands in her lap. He's 29, she said. Yes. Has he ever? No. Cassian's voice was flat. He was clean. It was always clean. I made sure of it. He paused. I thought I made sure of it. Elena was quiet. Outside, the city did its indifferent thing. Inside the car, the weight of the name. Marco sat between them like a piece of furniture that had been moved into the room without permission. What are you going to do? She said. I don't know yet. She looked at him. That's twice tonight you've said that. Yes. Are you saying it because you don't know, or because you do know and you don't want to say it? He looked at her. Both. She nodded slowly. She looked back at her hands. He knew where I was, she said. 2 days after I moved in. Yes. So the moved doormat, the door handle, the car on the street. She said each one flatly, sequentially, like items on a list. That was never strangers. That was your cousin's information being used by people he chose to give it to. Yes. She pressed her lips together, said nothing for a moment. Then, he's 29, she said again. Not as a defense, as a fact she was trying to understand the weight of. Old enough, Cassian said. Yes. She looked out the window. Old enough. They rode in silence for 3 blocks. Then Elena said something Cassian had not expected. I want to see him. He looked at her. Not tonight, she said. Not like this. But I want to be in the room when you talk to him. She turned to face him, and her expression was the most certain he had seen it since the coffee shop. He put men outside my door while I was carrying your son. I want to look at him when he knows that you know that. She paused. I want to see his face. Cassian studied her for a long moment. Why? He said. Because I've been a peripheral figure in my own marriage for 4 years, she said, and I'm done being peripheral. Whatever happens from here, I'm in the room. I'm in all the rooms. She held his gaze. This is my life too. My son's life. I'm not sitting somewhere safe while you make the decisions that determine what we inherit. The car slowed for a light. Cassian looked at his wife, at the coat she had been wearing through a fire escape and a warehouse, and most of this night, at the bag she had packed in 7 minutes, at the zip tie marks on her wrist that she had not mentioned since the warehouse, at the expression on her face that had the specific quality of someone who has decided something absolutely and is waiting for the world to catch up. Okay, he said. She turned back to face forward. The light changed. They drove. And Cassian thought about Marco Moretti, 29 years old, clean, carefully kept at the edges, protected. And he thought about what it meant that the person who had supplied Elena's address was someone he had spent years protecting from exactly the kind of choices Marco had apparently decided to make anyway. And he understood, with the particular clarity that arrives only after a night like this one, that the life he had built, the structure of it, the loyalties, the architecture of trust and caution and careful distance, had failed him not from outside but from everywhere at once, from the foundation upward, from the people he had believed in most to the cousin he had believed in by default, and that whatever came next could not be a repaired version of what had existed before. It had to be something else entirely. He looked at Elena in the seat beside him. She was looking straight ahead, her hands in her lap, and she was doing something he recognized after a moment, as the thing she did when she was thinking something through to its conclusion, the particular stillness of focused thought, the slight tension in the set of her jaw, the way her breathing slowed. He had seen that expression across dinner tables, across hotel lobbies, across the wreckage of 4 years of a marriage that had been slowly dismantled by a man at a restaurant table who had been patient for 11 years. Not, until now, understood what an extraordinary amount of attention it had taken to keep noticing it. Elena, he said. She looked at him. When this is over, he started. Not yet, she said, not unkindly. When this is over, we'll talk about when this is over. She looked at him steadily. Right now, there's still a 29-year-old with your name who thinks his bet is still standing. He held her gaze. Let's go correct that impression, she said. The hotel was 11 minutes away. Marco Moretti was somewhere in the city, believing the night had gone according to plan. And Silas Romano was sitting in a restaurant on the warehouse side of the city with a glass of water and 11 years of patience that had just run out of road, because the thing he had never accounted for, the variable that had not existed when he began, was that the woman he had chosen as his instrument had turned out to be the most dangerous person in the room, not because she was afraid, because she had decided she wasn't. The hotel was a place called the Meridian, mid-range, anonymous, the kind of establishment where the staff were trained to be forgettable and the guests were trained to expect nothing that would make them memorable in return. Cassian had stayed in places like this exactly twice in his adult life, both times under circumstances that required him to not exist for a period of hours. And he understood their particular utility the way he understood the utility of most things, functionally, without sentiment. The room was on the 7th floor. Elena went to the bathroom first, and Cassian stood at the window looking at the city below and called Decker. Marco's location, he said. His apartment, East Side, 12 blocks from where Elena was staying. A pause. He's been home since 9. I have eyes on the building. Keep them there. Cassian watched a cab move through the intersection below. Nobody approaches him tonight. Nobody makes contact. I want him exactly where he is until I'm ready. Understood. Decker hesitated. Silas? Still at the restaurant when I left. He'll have moved by now. I can track him. Do it! Cassian pressed his free hand flat against the cold glass of the window. And Decker, I need the names and locations of all 3 external partners by 6 in the morning. I'll have 2 of them by then. The third is slower. 2 is enough to start. He hung up. Elena came out of the bathroom. She had washed her face and her wrists, and there were faint marks where the zip tie had been. Not deep, not serious, but there, the way certain things are simply there. She looked at him, and then looked at the city through the window he was standing at, and she came and stood beside him without saying anything. They stood there for a moment. Are you hungry? He said. No. You should eat something. I know. She said it without argument, which meant she was already thinking about the same thing. She moved to the small desk near the window and sat in the chair there and opened her bag and found crackers. The same crackers, he realized, from the brownstone kitchen, which she had apparently transferred without thinking about it, and ate 3 of them slowly. He ordered food from the hotel menu. Plain things, the things she had described eating over the past 2 weeks. He ordered enough of them that she wouldn't have to think about it. He didn't ask her what she wanted. She noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. While they waited, Cassian sat on the edge of the bed and began the work of the night. He made calls that took precise language, conversations with men who dealt in specifics and had no use for anything else. He arranged meetings. He created separations in the organization's financial structure that would ring-fence the damage Marco had done and limit the exposure to the external partners. He identified the 3 men whose names Silas had used as intermediaries and made sure, through quiet channels, that they understood their moment of utility had ended. He did all of this while Elena sat at the desk and ate crackers and fruit from the plate the hotel had sent up, and he was aware of her the entire time, the sound of her breathing, the occasional rustle of her bag when she reached into it, the fact that she was not sleeping even though it was after midnight, and she had been through more of a night than most people experienced in a year. Around 2 in the morning, she said, "What time tomorrow?" "Marco at 10. He lowered his phone. If you still want to be there. I still want to be there. Then 10. She nodded. She looked at the window. And Silas? Silas is different. He paused. Silas requires a different kind of conversation. Meaning what? He held her gaze. Meaning I haven't decided if it's a conversation at all. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. I need you to think carefully about that. I am thinking carefully about it. I mean, before you decide, not after. She set down the half-eaten cracker. Whatever you do about Silas, Cassian, our son will live in the consequences of it. I need you to hold that in your mind before you make a choice that can't be undone. He said nothing for a moment. I know, he said. Do you? Elena. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. I know. I hear you. I'm not the same man my father was. She held his gaze. I know you're not. She picked up the cracker again. That's why I'm saying it, because it's worth saying to a man who might actually listen. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he looked down at his hands. Try to sleep, he said. You first, she said, which was almost a joke. She said it like she almost meant it. He did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window and let her take the bed, and he worked through the rest of the night with the city below him doing its patient 4 a.m. thing. The occasional truck, the occasional siren, the ordinary machinery of a place that does not stop for anyone's crisis. At 5:53, Decker sent a message with 2 names and addresses. At 6:10, Cassian made a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds, at the end of which both names had been dealt with in a way that would not require revisiting. At 6:45, Elena woke up. She sat up in the hotel bed and looked at him across the room and said, You didn't sleep. No. Cassian, I'm fine. He stood, which his back registered with the particular complaint of a man in his mid-40s who had spent the night in a hotel chair. Decker has the partners. 2 of them are handled. The third is somewhere in Philadelphia. He'll surface by tomorrow. She looked at him. And Marco? 10 o'clock. She got up. She went to the bathroom and came back and ate from the remainder of the food on the desk from the previous night, methodically, with the slightly detached focus of someone managing hunger as a practical problem. She was 17 weeks pregnant, and she had been through 2 days that would have flattened most people. And she was sitting at a hotel desk eating cold toast with the particular focused calm of someone who had decided that falling apart was a luxury the situation did not permit. He watched her do all of this and felt something that he did not have a clean word for. Not admiration exactly, because admiration had a distance to it that this didn't have. Something more like recognition. The recognition of a person seeing another person clearly for the first time in a long time, or possibly the first time at all. They left the hotel at 8:30. Cassian drove to a location Decker had cleared, a private office space in a building with no organizational connection to anything Silas or Marco would have touched. Clean floors, a table, chairs, nothing on the walls. The kind of room where things were said, and then the room forgot about them. Marco Moretti arrived at 9:58 in the company of 2 men Cassian had sent, which Marco understood the meaning of, because he was quiet when they brought him in, and his face had the look of a man who has spent the night arriving at a reckoning. He was 29, as Elena had noted twice. He had dark hair and his father's eyes, Cassian's uncle's eyes, which meant in certain lights he looked like a younger, less weathered version of Cassian's own father. And Cassian filed that observation in the part of his mind where he kept things that were not useful. Marco sat at the table. Elena was already in the room, seated against the wall to Cassian's left. Not at the table. Deliberately not at the table, present, visible, occupying the room in a way that could not be missed, but not between the 2 men. She had chosen that position herself, without discussion, when they arrived 20 minutes before Marco. Cassian looked at his cousin. Marco looked at Elena. His face did something when he saw her. When he saw the marks on her wrists, which were faint but visible against the lighter fabric of her sleeve where she had pushed it up. His face did something involuntary, the kind of movement that happens before a person can arrange their expression into something more controlled, and it was not nothing. It was not the face of a man who felt nothing about what he had done, but it was also not enough to matter. "Say it," Cassian said. Marco looked at him. "Cassian, don't. Just say what it was." Marco pressed his lips together. He put his hands flat on the table. He was wearing a watch Cassian recognized, a birthday gift 3 years ago, chosen by Elena, which Cassian had handed to him in a restaurant with no awareness that in 3 years he would be sitting across a table from this watch in a room like this. "Silas approached me 14 months ago," Marco said. His voice was steady, in the way voices are steady when a person has decided that the conversation they are having is one they have to get through rather than survive. "He told me what your father did to his brother. He had documentation, timestamps, records, names." A pause. "I already knew your father wasn't. I already knew what he was. But seeing it laid out." He stopped. "Keep going," Cassian said. "He told me the organization was going to fracture regardless, that you were already destabilized, that the people on the outside had been waiting for the right moment for years, and this was going to be it regardless of whether I was involved." He looked at his hands. He said I could either be on the outside of what came after, or I could have a position in it. Another pause. "He said you'd be fine, that you'd lose the organization, but you'd be fine, that it wasn't about—" "He said I'd be fine," Cassian said. "Yes. And my wife going down a fire escape, my son. He said those would be fine." Marco looked up. "I didn't know about the baby. I swear to you I didn't know. You gave them her address. I gave Silas her address. I didn't know what he'd do with it. You gave a man running an 11-year revenge plan the location of my pregnant wife," Cassian said, "and you didn't know what he'd do with it." Marco was quiet. Elena had not moved from her position against the wall. She was looking at Marco with an expression that Cassian could not fully read from his angle, but she was completely still, and Marco kept glancing at her in the way people glance at the thing in a room that they cannot look at directly. "Look at her," Cassian said. Marco looked at him instead. "Cassian, look at her. Look at my wife." Marco looked at Elena. Elena looked back. She did not speak. She had told Cassian in the hotel that she wanted to be in the room, that she wanted to see Marco's face when he understood that they knew. And she was looking at his face now, and she was not showing him contempt or fury or the particular performance of betrayal that the moment might have permitted. She was just looking at him, measuring. The way you measure something you are trying to understand rather than condemn. "You're 29 years old," she said. Her voice was quiet. "What did you actually think was going to happen to you in the organization Silas was building? What was the plan for you specifically on the other side of this?" Marco blinked. "He told you that you'd have a position," she said. "Did you ask him what position? Did you ask him what leverage he'd have over you once you'd done what you did? Did you ask him what stopped him from using you the same way he used the man he spent 11 years being loyal to?" Marco opened his mouth, then closed it. "You gave him a tool," Elena said. "That's what you gave him, not a partnership, a tool. Because the only thing you had that he needed was access to Cassian, and once you gave him what he needed, you had nothing left that was worth protecting." She paused. "Did he tell you that part?" Marco looked at the table. "No," he said quietly. "No," Elena agreed. The room was very quiet. Cassian looked at his cousin. The birthday watch, the dark hair, the uncle's eyes. And he thought about 29 and what it meant and what it did not excuse. And he thought about what Elena had said in the hotel about consequences that outlasted decisions. And he thought about his father, who would not have asked any of the questions Elena had just asked. His father would have made a statement rather than asked a question. And the statement would have been final and permanent and would have taken approximately 90 seconds. Cassian was not his father. He had been told this twice in the past 12 hours. He was working on believing it. "You're going to give Decker everything," Cassian said. "Every communication, every account number, every name Silas mentioned, every meeting, every document." He leaned forward slightly. "You're going to do this today, completely. If I find one thing Decker doesn't already have that you withheld, the conversation we're having right now does not happen a second time." Marco looked up. "You understand me," Cassian said. "Yes." "Then we're done here." Marco looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Elena again, one more time, and in his face was something that was not quite an apology because the situation was too large for the word, but was adjacent to one in the way that a man who knows he has done an irreversible thing looks at the person he did it to when there is nothing left to offer except the acknowledgement of having done it. Elena held his gaze without blinking. Then she looked away first, which was her choice, and the choice itself communicated everything the room needed. Marco was taken out by the two men who had brought him in. The door closed. The room was quiet again. Elena sat against the wall for a moment. Then she stood and came to the table and sat in the chair across from where Cassian was standing, and she put both hands flat on the table. "Silas," she said. "Tonight," Cassian said. "Where?" "Decker has him. He went to a property on the west side last night, the one Decker mentioned. He's been there since 2 in the morning. He paused. "He's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For me to come to him." Cassian straightened. "He's been running this for 11 months, and now it's done, and he knows it's done, and he's waiting to see how I end it." Elena looked at him. "He wants you to come there." "Yes." "That concerns me." "It concerns me too." He met her gaze. "Which is why I'm going to spend the next 4 hours making sure that whatever he's prepared for my arrival doesn't have the effect he's prepared it for." She absorbed this. "I'm not coming to this one." He had not expected her to say that. He had been preparing to have the argument. She saw his expression and said, "Don't look surprised. I know the difference between being in the room and being in the way." She looked at her hands on the table. "I'll be with Fen, somewhere clean that you know about." She looked up. "And when you come back to me directly, not after, directly." "Yes." "And what happens at that property tonight?" She stopped. She held his gaze. "You come home." The word home landed in the hotel conference room with the particular weight of a word that was not describing a place. "I come home," he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she stood, picked up her bag, and moved toward the door. "Fen is outside?" she said. "Yes." She put her hand on the door. "Cassian," she said without turning around. "Yeah." "Don't let him make you into your father tonight." She paused. "Not because your father was wrong about everything, because you've spent 20 years trying to be something else, and it would be a waste to give that up in the last room." She went out. He He stood in the empty conference room for a long moment. Then he called Decker. The property on the west side was a converted warehouse, different from the Delm Road building, newer, better maintained, the kind of place that had been renovated into something that could pass for legitimate if anyone looked at the exterior. Cassian arrived at 9:17 in the evening in a car that was not his SUV, driven by a man who was not Fenn, accompanied by 3 others who approached the building from 2 different directions. He had spent the afternoon the way he spent the afternoon before any important decision, not planning exactly, but clearing, removing from his mind every piece of information that was not immediately useful. He had called Elena at 3, at 5, and at 7. Brief calls. She answered every one of them within 2 rings. On the 7 o'clock call, she told him she had eaten a real meal, which she reported with the mild satisfaction of someone announcing a small practical victory, and he told her Fenn was reliable, which she already knew, and they both held the phone without speaking for about 4 seconds before saying goodbye. 4 seconds was enough. He stood outside the West Side property at 9:17 and looked at it. The ground-level lights were on inside. Silas was there. Decker had confirmed movement 20 minutes ago. 2 others with him. Not more. Silas had never been the kind of man who needed numbers. He had always been the kind of man who was the number. Cassian went in through the west entrance. The interior was open plan at the ground level, the renovation having removed most of the original warehouse partitions. Good lighting. Better than Delm Road. The kind of lighting that suggested someone wanted to be seen, which Cassian registered and filed alongside his other concerns about the invitation quality of this meeting. Silas was standing in the center of the space, alone. His 2 men were visible at the periphery, one near the east wall, one near the north entrance, and Cassian's 3 men had them identified and positioned before Cassian was 12 steps inside the building. He knew this without looking. He trusted it the way he trusted things he had verified enough times to stop verifying. He walked to Silas, stopped 6 feet away. They looked at each other. Silas looked like a man who had slept. That was the first thing Cassian noticed. He looked rested in the way that either meant he was not afraid of this moment, or he had decided it was the moment he had been pointing toward for 11 years and had made a particular kind of peace with it. Either reading was possible. Both were probably true. "You moved fast," Silas said. "You knew I would." "I expected fast, not this fast." Silas tilted his head slightly. "Marco." "Marco." A small exhale from Silas. Not quite a laugh. "Something in the neighborhood." "How is he?" "Frightened, useful, alive." Cassian held his gaze. "Which are more options than he deserved." Silas looked at him for a moment. "You've changed the calculus." "You changed it first." A pause. "The baby," Silas said. "Yes." Another pause, longer. Silas looked at the floor, then back up. "I told you I didn't want her hurt. You put men outside her door. To scare her, not to... You put men outside the door of a woman who was 15 weeks pregnant and living alone," Cassian said, and his voice was the most controlled it had been all night, which in his experience meant it was also the most dangerous. "Whatever you intended, that is what you did, and she went down a fire escape in the rain because of it." He stopped. 5 floors, Silas. Metal grating. Wet. In the dark. Silas's jaw tightened. "Say something," Cassian said. "There's nothing to say." "No." Cassian looked at him. "There isn't." The building was very quiet. Cassian could hear his own pulse, which was steadier than the situation seemed to warrant, and which was a fact about himself he had never decided whether to be disturbed by. He looked at Silas Romano, 61 years old, 11 years at his right hand, the man who had stood at his father's grave and not flinched, and had apparently been planning this since before the dirt was settled on that grave. And he felt something he had not expected to feel, not rage. He had expected rage. He had been carrying what he believed was rage for the past 24 hours, and had been careful with it, the way you are careful with a container that is filled past its safe line. What he felt instead was older than rage, something that had no clean name, that lived in the space between knowing someone for 11 years and discovering in the space of 48 hours that you had known something that was not the thing you thought you knew. The grief from the restaurant table was still there, underneath everything, and he had not had time to look at it directly since then, and this was not the time, but it was there. I'm not going to kill you, Cassian said. Silas looked at him. I've thought about it, Cassian said. I thought about it last night in the hotel, and this morning in the car, and every hour of today. He paused. My wife told me to think about it carefully before I decided, so I thought about it carefully. He held Silas's gaze. My son will grow up knowing whatever I choose tonight, not knowing the details, knowing the shape of the choice, the kind of man his father was when someone who had been at his side for 11 years did what you did. He stopped. I'm not going to let you be the reason he inherits a father who answered the worst thing with the worst thing. Silas was very still. You'll lose everything you built inside my organization, Cassian said. Every account, every relationship, every position. Decker is finishing the paperwork tonight, and by tomorrow morning there is no version of my world that has your name in it, except as a problem that's been addressed. He paused. And you'll answer for what you did in a way that takes your freedom. Not quickly, not cleanly. Through the kind of process that takes a long time and is witnessed. He held Silas's gaze. You're going to sit in a room somewhere and watch the 11 years you spent building this get dismantled piece by piece while you can't do anything about it. That's what you're going to have. Silas looked at him. Something moved in his face. Not defiance, not capitulation. Something else. The expression of a man who has had something unexpected offered to him and is not certain what to do with it. You think that's worse, Silas said, than the other thing. I think it's different, Cassian said, and I'm choosing different. A long pause. Your father would have... I know what my father would have done, Cassian said. My father is the reason you spent 11 years building this. I'm not interested in being the next reason someone spends 11 years building the next one. The quiet of the building pressed in around the sentence. Silas looked at him for a very long moment. His hands were at his sides. His face was doing something complicated that Cassian did not try to decode. Then Cassian's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Elena. She never called during... He had told her he would call when it was done, and she had agreed, and she had held to that agreement on every other call for the past 2 days. She did not call in the middle. That was not something she would do without a reason. He answered. Elena, he said. Her voice was not the voice from any of the previous calls. It was the voice from the warehouse office, controlled, managed, the particular voice of a person who is keeping themselves together by force of will and is spending that force carefully. Cassian, she said, something's wrong. He went cold. Ben is here, she said quickly. I'm not alone. But a brief pause that lasted longer than brief pauses should last. Cassian, I need you to come now. It's the baby. He was already moving. He was across the floor and through the west entrance and into the night air before his body had fully processed the instruction. And he was in the car with the door open before the driver had the engine started. And he set a location that was not a question, the place where Fenn had taken Elena, and the car was moving before he had the door fully closed. Behind him, in the converted warehouse, Silas Romano stood in the center of the open floor with 2 men at the periphery and the quiet settling back into the space where Cassian had been, and he looked at the west entrance for a long moment. Then he sat down on the nearest available surface, a crate, wooden, old, and put his hands on his knees. He sat there. Whatever had been waiting 11 years to arrive had arrived, and the shape of its arrival was nothing he had planned for and nothing he could have. And Silas Romano, who had been patient for 11 years and methodical for 11 years and certain for 11 years, sat in an empty warehouse and found, for the first time in a long time, that he had. The drive took 11 minutes, and Cassian felt every second of them in a specific physical way. Not in his chest, where he expected to feel it, but in his hands, which were pressed flat against his thighs, because gripping anything would have been an admission of something he was not ready to admit. He called Elena back at the first red light. She answered immediately. I'm okay, she said, before he could speak. Cassian, I'm okay. The baby... I don't know. Something felt wrong. It might be nothing. Fenn is driving me to St. Catherine's. I'm 7 minutes behind you. Okay. Elena. I know. Her voice was still managed, still the controlled voice, but underneath it was something that had not been there in any of the previous calls. Something unsteady at the foundation, the way a building sounds different when what's underneath it shifts. Just drive. He drove. The hospital was a private facility on the north side that Cassian had used twice before for organizational reasons. People who needed treatment without paperwork trails, without questions. He had a relationship with the administrator. He had never imagined using that relationship for this. He pulled up to the entrance at 9:41 and was through the doors before the car stopped moving. Ben was in the corridor outside the second examination room. He saw Cassian and stood and said nothing, which told Cassian that Fenn did not have information yet, which was either good or neutral, and Cassian chose neutral and kept walking. He pushed through the examination room door. Elena was on the bed, not lying flat, partially upright, the way they position you when they want you calm but not horizontal. She had her coat off. There was a monitor beside the bed with a display Cassian did not know how to read, but looked at anyway, the way you look at something you need to understand and cannot yet. A doctor he did not recognize was at the foot of the bed, reviewing something on a tablet, and a nurse was adjusting something near Elena's left arm. Elena looked at him when he came in. She did not say anything. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been holding something together alone for the past 40 minutes and has just been given permission to stop holding it quite so tightly, and that expression, more than anything else in the room, was what hit him with the specific physical force that everything else had not managed. He crossed to her. He took her hand, the one without the IV line the nurse was working on, and he held it, and he did not say anything either, because there was nothing to say that was not contained in standing there. "What happened?" he asked the doctor. The doctor was a woman in her mid-50s with the particular composure of someone who delivered uncertain news dozens of times a week, and had learned to do it without making the uncertainty larger than it was. Mrs. Moretti experienced some cramping and spotting approximately 50 minutes ago. Given her history, she glanced briefly at Elena, a look that told Cassian there was context here he was not fully aware of. "We wanted to monitor immediately. We've done an ultrasound." "And?" "The baby is fine." She said it with the directness of someone who knows that's the only sentence in the room that matters. "Heartbeat is strong. Position is good. What Mrs. Moretti experienced is consistent with subchorionic hemorrhage, a small collection of blood between the uterine wall and the placenta. It's more common than most people realize, and in the majority of cases it resolves on its own." She paused. "However, given the physical stress of the past 24 hours, another brief look at Elena, who held the doctor's gaze evenly. "I want her resting, real rest, not hotel room rest, somewhere stable, horizontal, for a minimum of 48 hours. Cassian looked at Elena. Elena was looking at the monitor beside the bed. "Can I hear it?" he said. The doctor looked at him. Then she moved to the monitor and adjusted something, and the room filled with a sound, fast, rhythmic, steady. The particular sound that Cassian had only ever heard described and had imagined in an abstract way, and had not understood was this specific and this loud and this undeniably, physically real. He stood at the side of the bed, holding Elena's hand and listening to his son's heartbeat fill a hospital room on the north side of the city at 9:48 in the evening, and he was aware that he was a man who had spent 20 years operating in a world where strength meant never being visibly moved, and he was also aware that he did not currently care about that. Elena turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were wet. She had not cried once through all of it: the fire escape, the warehouse, the zip ties, Marco, the hotel, the drive to this room. And she was crying now quietly, in the way that happens when the danger passes and the body finally processes the bill. He pressed her hand. She pressed back. The doctor gave them a moment. Then she said practically, "We'll keep her overnight for observation. If everything remains stable, she can go home tomorrow afternoon. I want to be clear that this is a precaution, not an emergency. The baby is not in distress." "Thank you," Elena said. Her voice was steady again. She wiped her face with her free hand with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone tidying up. The doctor and nurse withdrew. The room was quiet except for the monitor. Cassian pulled the chair from the corner to the side of the bed and sat in it without releasing Elena's hand. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at him. "Is it done?" she said. "Most of it." "Silas." "We were in the middle of it when you called." He paused. "I told him what I told you I was going to tell him. He didn't argue." She looked at him carefully. "And then you left." "And then you called, and I left." He held her gaze. "Yes." She absorbed this. He's still there. Decker's men are there. He's not going anywhere. He paused. The conversation was finished. What happened after it doesn't require me to be present. She looked at him for a long moment. You're sure? She said. I'm sure. She held his gaze for another moment, reading whatever was in his face with the attention of someone who had spent 4 years learning the difference between what he said and what he meant. And then she nodded, once, and looked back at the ceiling. Marco gave Decker everything, she said. He started this afternoon. Decker says he's being thorough. Is he doing it because he's scared or because he feels... Both, Cassian said. Probably. Does it matter? She thought about it. For what you do with him? Yes. He looked at her. What do you think I should do with him? She turned her head to look at him. I think he's 29 years old and he made a decision that he didn't understand the full weight of. And Silas used that exactly the way Silas used everyone who had something he needed. She paused. I also think he gave someone my address when I was living alone and pregnant and didn't know I needed to be afraid. She paused again. Both of those things are true at the same time. So I think you cut him out completely, not as punishment, as reality. He made himself someone you can't trust, and you can't operate with someone you can't trust. But you don't... She stopped. He's your family. Whatever he did, he's the family that's left. She looked at the monitor. Our son is going to grow up needing family. Real family, whatever shape that takes. She paused. Let Marco spend the next 10 years becoming someone worth having back in the room. That's a consequence too. That's its own kind of sentence. Cassian looked at his wife in the hospital bed. He thought about his father, who had resolved questions about family with the particular efficiency that had created Silas Romano's 11-year project. He thought about the chain of it, action to consequence to response to new consequence, the endless self-perpetuating machinery of a world that answered everything with finality and then was surprised when finality came back looking for more. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay? Okay. He held her gaze. You're right. She blinked. Then she said, I need you to remember this moment specifically. When I tell you I'm right and you agree with me, because it's worth commemorating. He looked at her. She was almost smiling. Not quite. The night was too recent, the monitor too loud, the marks on her wrist too visible. But almost. The almost of it was enough. Get some sleep, he said. You're staying? Yes. She looked at the chair. That chair is going to destroy your back. My back is already destroyed. Go to sleep. She settled back against the pillow. She did not release his hand. He did not attempt to reclaim it. He sat in the chair and listened to the monitor and watched the city outside the window do the particular things cities do at 10 in the evening, and he thought about what came next with the specific, practical clarity of a man who had spent the night making irrevocable choices and now had to build something out of the space the choices had created, the organization. He had said it to Elena in the car, obliquely, making the organization not worth the effort of destabilizing. She had understood what he meant and had chosen not to make him say it plainly. He was going to have to say it plainly now, to himself at least, because the decision was one that required full acknowledgement rather than the comfortable vagueness of implication. I was going to dismantle it. Not all at once. That was not how these things worked, and the pretense of all at once was how people got hurt. But systematically. Over the next year, maybe 2. The legitimate holdings were already separated enough to survive independently. The rest, the structure that had taken 20 years to build, the infrastructure of power and fear and carefully maintained relationships, would be wound down in the methodical way that caused the least disruption to the people inside it who had not chosen the worst parts of it. He would take losses, significant ones. He had already accepted this in the abstract, the way you accept the cost of something before you understand what it actually feels like to pay it. He would figure out what that felt like when he got there. He was still sitting in the chair at 2 in the morning when Decker sent a message. 3 sentences. Silas Romano had been transferred to a facility that was not a prison in any official sense but operated with equivalent restriction, under the authority of people who owed Cassian specific and long-standing obligations. The external partners, all 3, including the one in Philadelphia, who had surfaced that afternoon, had been dealt with through channels that would not require any further attention. The financial structures Silas had built were in the process of being dismantled, which Decker estimated would take 8 days. 8 days. Cassian looked at the message for a moment. Then he put the phone face down on his knee and looked at Elena, who was asleep. Genuinely, deeply asleep, in the way she had not been since before the hotel, her breathing slow and even, one hand still loosely around his. He sat in the chair. He did not sleep. He was still awake when morning came through the window, slow and gray and ordinary. Elena was discharged the following afternoon. Dr. Farrow, her own doctor, who had come across the city when Cassian called at 6 in the morning, because Cassian had asked her to, and because the call had contained sufficient information for Dr. Farrow to understand that this was not a request that permitted a different answer, reviewed everything and confirmed what the night doctor had said. Subchorionic hemorrhage, small, already showing signs of resolution on the morning's ultrasound. Rest. Real rest. Nothing strenuous for 2 weeks, a follow-up in 4 days. "He's fine," Dr. Farrow said. She said it with the same warmth she had used in her office the day she told Elena boy, which was the warmth of someone who had been in this work long enough to know that those 2 words were the most important 2 words in most rooms she entered. "He's stubborn, and he's fine. The heart rate this morning was excellent." "Stubborn," Elena said. Dr. Farrow smiled. "Takes after someone." Elena looked at Cassian. He looked back. They left the hospital at 2:14 in the afternoon. Fun drove. Cassian sat in the back with Elena, who had her bag on her lap and the window down 2 inches despite the October chill, because she said she needed air, which was true, and also because she was the kind of person who needed to feel the outside of a space even when she was inside it, which Cassian understood only because he had spent 4 years mostly failing to pay attention to it and was now paying attention to everything. "Where are we going?" she said. "Wherever you want," he said. "I mean that exactly. Wherever you want to be right now." She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about it for a genuine moment. He could see her thinking, the slight movement at her jaw, the eyes going to the middle distance. Then she said, "The brownstone." He looked at her. "I know it's been compromised," she said. "I know we can't stay, but I left things there in a hurry, and I want—" She stopped. "I want to go back and leave it properly. On my terms. Not running." She looked at him. "Is it clear?" "Since last night." "Then the brownstone, for an hour, and then somewhere else." "Okay," he said. Fen drove them to the brownstone. Elena walked through it slowly. She did not rush. She went room to room with the particular deliberate pace of someone saying goodbye to a place, not because they loved it, but because it was theirs, briefly, and it deserved to be left with intention rather than abandoned. She collected what she had left in the hurry of the previous morning. A book, a charger, the specific brand of tea that she had brought from the apartment on the east side, and that existed nowhere else in the city, as far as she knew. She came back to the main room where Cassian was waiting. She looked around it one more time. "Okay," she said. They went to a hotel for 3 days. A different one, clean, booked under a name that did not exist yet. And on the morning of the second day, Cassian sat at the desk while Elena slept, and he wrote by hand a list. It was not a long list. It contained 7 items. Each item was a piece of the organization that could be handed off, wound down, or converted into something that had no operational connection to what it had been part of. Beside each item, he wrote a name, the person responsible for managing the transition. It took him 40 minutes to write. He looked at it when he was done. 40 minutes to begin ending something that had taken 20 years to build. He folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket and sat at the desk until Elena woke up. And when she did, he ordered breakfast from the hotel menu the same way he had ordered food at the Meridian, the things she could eat without asking. And when it arrived, he moved the desk chair to the side of the bed, and they ate breakfast together in the second hotel room of the past 4 days, which was not the setting either of them would have chosen, and was also, somehow, the most ordinary morning they had shared in as long as he could remember. She ate most of the toast. He ate most of the eggs. Neither of them commented on this. On the 3rd day, she told him she wanted to see an apartment, not the East Side apartment. That lease was ending, quietly, through Mara, who had handled everything with the same wordless efficiency she had brought to the prenatal vitamins and the sparkling water. A different apartment. She had been looking, she said, at listings on her phone during the past 2 days, which explained the periods of focused silence he had noticed and had not inquired about. "I found one," she said. "It has a second bedroom." He looked at her. "I'm not ready for the house," she said. "Not yet. Not the mansion. Not the architecture of before." She held his gaze steadily. "But I'm also not staying in hotels indefinitely, and I need a room for the baby that's mine, that I chose." She paused. "Is that—" "Tell me where it is," he said. She showed him on her phone. It was on the west side, not the warehouse district west side, a different part, residential, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings were old but maintained and the streets had trees that were just entering their fall color. 4th floor, 2 bedrooms. A window in the second bedroom that faced south, which she pointed out specifically. "South-facing," she said, "for the light." "For the light," he said. "Babies need light," she said, with the slight defensiveness of someone who has read this in a book and suspects they might be about to be teased about it. He was not going to tease her about it. "Call the listing agent," he said. She called. They moved in 11 days later. Cassian did not move in with her because she had not asked him to and he had not offered, because the offer was not his to make yet. But he was there every day. He came in the mornings and left in the evenings, and in between he learned the apartment the way you learn a place you intend to understand, where the light was in the afternoon, which cabinet stuck, which window let in the most noise from the street. He fixed the cabinet. He replaced a faucet that dripped. He bought a rug for the hallway because the floor was cold and she was walking on it in socked feet. She noticed the rug. She said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. Then she went back to what she was doing, which was arranging things in the kitchen the way she wanted them, and she did not say anything else about the rug, but she stopped walking barefoot on the hallway floor. He noticed that too. The second bedroom was empty for the first 3 weeks. Elena had bought a few things: a mobile she had ordered online, a small white dresser, a lamp with a soft shade, but the room still had the quality of a space being considered rather than inhabited. On a Saturday in early November, Cassian arrived with wood, not purchased furniture, lumber, a specific quantity of it, in specific dimensions, which he had researched for 6 days without mentioning it to anyone, along with a set of basic tools that he had also purchased without mentioning. Elena opened the door and looked at him, and then at the wood behind him. "What is this?" she said. "A cradle." He looked at her. "I'm going to build it." She looked at the lumber. "You've built furniture before?" "No." "Cassian, I watched 47 tutorial videos," he said. "I know what I'm doing." A pause. "Approximately." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider and stepped back. He built the cradle over the next 3 Saturdays. It was not a fast process. The first Saturday, he mostly measured things incorrectly and had to go back to the lumberyard on Sunday, which he did without mentioning it to Elena, except by way of arriving on Sunday with additional wood, which she observed and said nothing about. The second Saturday, the joints were wrong, and he spent most of the afternoon taking apart what he'd assembled in the morning. He did all of this in the second bedroom while Elena read in the living room or moved around the apartment doing her own things, and occasionally she appeared in the doorway of the second bedroom and looked at the progress and said something or said nothing, and then went back to what she was doing. On the third Saturday, he finished it. It was not a perfect cradle. One side was slightly lower than the other. Not dramatically, not in a way that would matter, but visible if you looked at it straight on. The wood was good, but the finish was uneven, slightly rougher in one corner where he had sanded it differently. The joints held solidly, which was the thing that mattered most. He stood back and looked at it. Elena was in the doorway. She came in and looked at it beside him. She crouched, carefully, the deliberate movement of a woman at 22 weeks who was learning to negotiate her own center of gravity, and ran her hand along the lower rail. Then she stood back up. "Don't fix the side," she said. He looked at her. "The uneven part." She gestured at it. "Leave it." "Elena, I can take 20 minutes and—" "Leave it." She looked at him. "You made this. With your own hands, in this room, over 3 Saturdays. She held his gaze. "I don't want it fixed. I want it the way it is." He looked at the cradle. He said nothing for a moment. "Okay," he said. She nodded once. They stood in the second bedroom in the south-facing light of a November afternoon, looking at an imperfect cradle that was also without question, the most significant thing Cassian Moretti had built in his adult life. December came. The organization's transition moved at the pace Cassian had set. Deliberately, without drama, the quiet redistribution of a structure that had been built over 20 years and was not going to disappear overnight. He took the losses he had accepted in the abstract and found that the actual experience of them was less devastating than he had prepared for, which was not something he had anticipated. He told this to Elena one evening in the apartment kitchen. She was at the counter and she turned to look at him. "You thought it would feel worse?" "I thought losing it would feel like losing something." "And?" He looked at his hands on the kitchen table. "It feels like setting something down." He paused. "It feels like my arms were full for a long time and now they're not." She looked at him for a moment, then she turned back to the counter. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." He came to the apartment every morning and left every evening. Some evenings she asked him to stay for dinner, and some evenings she didn't, and he never stayed when she didn't ask. He learned to cook 3 things. Not well, but adequately, with the specific stubbornness of a man who has decided to learn something and will not stop until he has learned it. The 3rd thing was a soup she had mentioned once, in passing, that her grandmother used to make. He found a recipe online. He made it 6 times before it was right. He brought it in a container on a Tuesday. She ate 2 bowls. She did not comment on the fact that he had clearly been practicing. She also did not have to. Dr. Farrow's appointments became a rhythm. Cassian drove her to everyone. He waited in the waiting room the first 2 times because Elena had not suggested he come in and he had not asked. On the 3rd appointment, she appeared in the doorway of the waiting room and said, "You can come in, you know." "I didn't want to assume. You've been sitting in a waiting room for 40 minutes. The magazine selection is better than I expected." She looked at him with an expression that was exasperated, and also, underneath the exasperation, something warmer. "Come in," she said. He came in. He watched the ultrasound with the focused attention of someone encountering something important for the first time and determined to miss nothing. He asked Dr. Farrow questions, specific questions, the kind that told her he had been reading and had been reading carefully. And she answered them with the slight surprise of a doctor accustomed to partners who nodded without listening. In the car afterward, Elena said, "You've been reading?" "Yes." "How much?" "A reasonable amount." Define reasonable. "Every book in the parenting section of the bookstore on Clement Street." He paused. "There were 11. She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "Cassian," she said. "The sleep chapter is alarming," he said. "Across all 11 books, there is no consensus. Every expert contradicts the previous expert. It's the least well-organized body of literature I've encountered in 20 years of reading about things I needed to understand." She stared at him. "I've made peace with the uncertainty," he said. She turned back to face forward. She pressed her lips together, and he could see from the corner of his eye that she was doing the almost smiling thing. The thing that was not quite a smile because the circumstances were not quite a smiling matter, except that they also were. 11 books, she said. "I'm thorough." She shook her head. She looked out the window. She said nothing else on the drive home, but when they arrived at the apartment building and she got out of the car, she did not immediately go inside. She stood on the sidewalk in the December afternoon and she looked at him over the roof of the car. "Come up," she said. "Have dinner." It was not a question. "Okay," he said. Luca Moretti was born on the 14th of February, which was the kind of date that would have seemed contrived if it had been chosen, and which arrived with the specific indifference of reality, which makes no effort toward symbolism and achieves it anyway. I was born at 6:47 in the morning, after 11 hours of labor that Elena managed with the same focused, slightly furious determination she brought to everything difficult, and which Cassian was present for in its entirety, including the parts that were hard to witness and the parts that were impossible to look away from, and the final part when the room shifted around a sound that was new and also, inexplicably, familiar. Cassian held his son for the first time at 7:03 in the morning. He was not prepared for the weight of it. Not the physical weight, though that too was surprising, the specific compact solidity of a person who has just arrived, but the other weight, the weight of holding something that required nothing from him except presence and would, for this exact moment and not many more, Receive that presence as entirely sufficient. He stood at the side of Elena's bed and held his son, and his son's face was doing the unfocused, furious, searching thing that newborn faces do, and Cassian looked at him with the expression of a man who has walked through enough fire to know that what he is holding is the reason fire matters. Elena was watching him. She had been watching him since the nurse placed Luca in his arms, with the specific attention of a woman who has spent 4 years studying a man's face and has seen something in it she has not seen before. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. "You can sit down," she said. "You don't have to stand like you're guarding something." He sat on the edge of the chair they had pulled to the bedside. Luca made a sound. Cassian went still, the specific stillness of a man who does not yet know what sounds mean what and is taking no chances. "He's okay," Elena said. "How do you know?" "Because I've been listening to him for the past 40 minutes, and that particular sound means he's working something out." She held out her hands. "Give him here." Cassian transferred him with the careful, slightly excessive deliberateness of someone handling something irreplaceable, which Luca appeared to find acceptable, because the sounds stopped when Elena held him. Cassian sat in the chair. He looked at his wife holding their son in a hospital room at 7:08 in the morning, and he thought about the 40-minute drive 4 months ago when all of this began, and the ultrasound photograph folded in a coat pocket, and a hotel hallway and a woman in a white shirt who had been placed there as precisely as a clock hand, and a fire escape in the rain, and a warehouse, and a restaurant table, and 11 years, and a cousin who had been 29 and frightened, and a cradle with one side slightly lower than the other. He thought about all of it and felt the accumulated weight of it and understood that this was what it had been building toward. Not the confrontation, not the reckoning, not even the choice he had made in the West Side warehouse. This room, this morning, this specific, ordinary, irreplaceable moment. Luca made another sound. Elena adjusted her hold. The sound stopped. They went home 3 days later. Not to the West Side apartment, to a house. Elena had found it in January, when her search had moved from apartments to something with more room, more yard, more permanence. She had shown Cassian the listing one evening at the kitchen table and said, "Look at this." And he had looked, and she had pointed out the yard and the neighborhood and the particular quality of the light in the photographs. And then she had pointed to a structure in the back of the yard and said, "It's a workshop." He had looked at the workshop. "You keep talking about making things," she said. "Furniture. After the cradle." She held his gaze. "I thought you could make Luca's furniture." He had looked at the listing for a long moment. Then he had looked at her. "This isn't the old house." "No," she said. "It isn't." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They signed the papers in February, 10 days before Luca arrived. The house was not ready for them when they came home from the hospital. There were boxes, half-unpacked rooms, a kitchen that had not yet been arranged in any coherent order. And Elena looked at all of this and said, "Perfect," which she meant literally, because a house in the middle of being made into a home was, at that moment, exactly what they needed. Cassian put Luca down for the first time in the cradle in the room with the south-facing window, which they had moved from the apartment, uneven side and all, and stood back and looked at it. His son slept. The weeks that followed were the hardest and the most ordinary of Cassian's adult life, simultaneously, in proportions that shifted daily and sometimes hourly. He learned that exhaustion was a landscape rather than a state, not a thing you arrived at and left, but a country you lived in, with its own terrain and its own weather. He learned that the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning had a specific quality of isolation that he had never encountered in 20 years of late nights and early mornings, and that walking the hallway of the new house at 3 a.m. with a 7-pound person on his shoulder was nothing like those 20 years, and also the only thing he wanted to be doing. He came home every night. Not before dinner. Dinner was the fixed point now, the thing around which everything else was required to move. The commitment that existed above every other commitment. He was there for dinner. He was there for the nights. He was there for the mornings, which were sometimes beautiful and sometimes very difficult, and were always, in the particular way of ordinary mornings, completely real. Elena went back to work in April. The career she had put aside during their marriage, the architecture work she had been trained for and had loved, and had set down somewhere in the 3rd year of their life together without fully acknowledging that she was doing it. She went back part-time at first, then more. And when she came home in the evenings, she had a quality about her that Cassian recognized as a person who has spent the day doing work they are suited for, which is a different kind of tired than the kind you accumulate from work that doesn't fit. He noticed this. He told her. She looked at him as though he had said something surprising, and then she said, "You noticed." "I notice things now," he said. She held his gaze. "That's a recent development." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "I know." And she meant something by it that was larger than the two words, which he understood and which he held carefully. One evening in June, Elena came home from work to find Cassian in the kitchen. This was not unusual by June. He was in the kitchen most evenings, attempting things from the repertoire of practical cooking he had been building since November with the methodical seriousness he had previously applied to operations that could end careers or worse. But on this evening, he was also wearing a paint-stained shirt, which was unusual, and there were wood shavings on the floor of the hallway that led to the back door. She stood in the hallway and looked at the wood shavings. "Workshop?" she said. "Starting on a chair," he said from the kitchen. "For the yard." She looked at the shavings for a moment. Then she hung up her coat and came into the kitchen and looked at what he was making for dinner and said, "Smells good." 40 minutes, he said. She nodded. She went to check on Luca, who was in the small bouncer seat that had appeared in the kitchen 3 weeks ago because he had decided, with the absolute authority of very small people, that he preferred to conduct his waking hours in whatever room contained the most activity. Luca was awake. He was looking at the ceiling with the focused attention of someone who finds it interesting, which was his general orientation toward most things. Elena crouched beside him. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. His face did the thing it did when he recognized her, which was the most complete expression of pure recognition that Cassian had ever observed on any face at any age, and which made Elena's face do something in response that Cassian, standing at the stove, watched without comment. He turned back to the stove. Dinner was ready at 6:40. They ate at the kitchen table, which was a table Cassian had found at an estate sale in March, and had repaired the leg on himself, which had taken 2 evenings and 1 tutorial video, and had produced a table that was solid and slightly idiosyncratic, and was exactly the right size for 2 people in a bouncer seat. Luca fell asleep in the bouncer during dinner. Elena noticed first. She glanced over and then looked back at Cassian and nodded toward the bouncer with an expression that said, "Don't move, don't speak, we have a window." He ate quietly. She ate quietly. Outside the kitchen window, the June evening was doing its long, slow thing, the light lasting past 8 now, the yard visible through the glass, the beginnings of the chair he was building visible against the workshop wall at the far end. Elena looked at the yard. "The chair is taking shape," she said, quietly, because of Luca. "It'll take another few weekends." "What wood?" "White oak." He paused. "Harder to work with than I expected, but it lasts." She looked at it through the window. Then she looked at him. "There's a listing," she said. "I was going to show you this weekend." "For what?" "A property in Connecticut, 2 hours out, land mostly." She looked at her plate. "I was thinking, eventually, not now, but eventually." She looked back up. "Somewhere with enough land for a real workshop, and for Luca to have space when he's older." She paused. "Not yet, but something to have in mind." He looked at her. She was looking at him with the expression that was not quite the coffee shop expression and not quite the hospital expression, but contained elements of both. The expression of a woman who has made it through the fire and arrived somewhere she did not expect and is carefully, deliberately, beginning to make plans in it. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you want to look at it." Or okay as in show me the listing, he said. "Tonight if you want." She looked at him for a moment. "Right," she said. From the bouncer, Luca made a sound. Both of them looked at him. He was still asleep, doing whatever small people do during sleep that produces sounds of mild self-satisfaction. Elena looked back at Cassian. Something moved across her face. Something he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it, in the way you wait for weather that is coming from a long distance. It was not forgiveness in any simple sense. Neither of them had ever pretended it was that simple. It was something more durable and more earned. The expression of a person who has looked at the full cost of a thing, and decided, with open eyes, to invest anyway. "He's going to be someone," she said quietly. "He already is," Cassian said. She looked at their son and the bouncer in the kitchen of the house they had chosen together. Then she looked at Cassian. "I know," she said. Outside, the last of the June light lay across the yard and the unfinished chair and the workshop with its half-open door, and the city was somewhere in the distance, and it did not seem very close. Cassian reached across the kitchen table. Elena looked at his hand. Then she put hers in it. Neither of them spoke. Luca slept. The light held a little longer, the way summer light does, as if it has somewhere to be and is in no particular hurry to be there, as if the evening itself has decided that this, right here, is worth staying in for one moment more.